Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate all of you. Excuse me. I appreciate all of you coming back. I know it's a long way to Austin, and I know this is a tricky time of the semester. Either your vacation is still underway, or your research time, or maybe classes have just started or about to start, or something, but I know it's hard. So again, the coordinating board always appreciates your time and effort. I also know I imposed upon your time last week to read a great big chunk of documents, which I sent your way. I hope you were all able to take a look at them, because the subcommittee that we convened to consider the teaching track, we went to a lot of work to put together that subcommittee, and it was a very good committee, a large committee that represented all kinds of institutions across the state. They had an excellent discussion, and they worked really hard on their recommendation. They gave it much more than due diligence, and I'll let Jacob and Lisa tell you more about that meeting here in a few minutes. So I hope that you were able to look over the minutes from that meeting and give some consideration to their recommendations, which we'll discuss here today, in addition to a few other things. A few bits of business. Jody is here. She needs to collect your $10, if you have it, for the lunch. If you would like to participate in the lunch but didn't tell us in advance that you want to, then please tell us now, and it's not impossible to maybe throw another sandwich on the plate. So tell Jody if that's the case. So thank you, Jody, for taking care of this. I didn't have an envelope, but that's fine.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jody. Also, our previous recording secretary, Jason Fabianchi, wasn't able to come today. So I would love it if we could have another volunteer to be our recording secretary for this meeting. I'll take some notes, but sometimes I jump in the conversation, and it's nice to have a safety net. And I can be your safety net, of course, when you're jumping in the conversation. So it's always a good idea to have two people in case we miss something too. So do we have any volunteers of someone who would like to serve as recording secretary? You can't hide behind the excuse of not bringing your laptop this time. Oh, thank you. Kimberly Ball? Okay. I sure appreciate that. It doesn't have to be anything super procedural. You don't have to get every single word. Of course, we're being recorded here on YouTube, as we were the first meeting, so we should be live on the web now. And the meeting will be preserved on YouTube as well, so we can always go back and you can refer your colleagues or anyone who wants to see exactly what we discussed to the recording on YouTube. Sometimes it takes a week or so for us to get it formatted and uploaded, but it'll be there before long. So because we are being broadcast, again, my reminder to make sure that when you speak, your microphone is on, that the little red light is on, and when you're not speaking, to turn your microphone off. And that's a big help to everyone in the booth who's trying to make sense of who's speaking at any one given time. Okay. So with that, I will turn it over to our two co-chairs, Jacob Blosser and Lisa Ramos. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We are delighted to welcome you back. It's so nice to see some familiar faces again. We have, I'm happy to tell you, I think I can go out on a limb and tell you this is our final meeting. We're going to make some decisions today, wrap some work up, and we are excited about the meeting that we have in front of us. I think our first order of business is to consider the meeting notes for the March 29th meeting. We also should, I think, also consider the meeting notes for the November meeting, or the subcommittee meeting that you've all seen. I think those are the two meeting minutes that we need to approve in order to go forward with our discussions. Are there any First, let's consider the minutes from the March meeting, minutes. Are there any additions to those minutes, any changes to those minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the minutes as reported? Fantastic. The second? Okay. All in favor of accepting the March meeting minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Passes unanimously. Now we need to consider the subcommittee minutes. The subcommittee worked very hard. Lisa and I were delighted to be co-chairs of that subcommittee. It was a fantastic group of very talented folks that came together to work on the History 7 through 12 field of study. You've seen those minutes. Those were sent out to you. Are there any areas of question or concern, not of addition or deletion, but any areas of question or concern with those minutes?
I sent the draft of those minutes out to those committee members who looked it over. There was one small correction that someone sent in, but apart from, which is made and reflected in the minutes that you have.
Is there a motion to accept those minutes for our discussion? Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded. All in favor of accepting those minutes for our discussion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The minutes are accepted. Now, before we begin, there are a couple of announcements that we have. The first is I want to draw your attention. You all should have a copy of the comparison of proposed history fields of study. It's a draft copy that you see in front of you. This is what we will be using primarily, although not exclusively, but this will help us structure our conversation. It just simply lists out the various different proposals. The academic field of study and teacher certification track A were proposed by this body in March. Teacher certification track B is what was proposed at the November subcommittee meeting. Then on the second page, or actually behind it, it addresses key differences between the different fields of study. And then what will structure much of our conversation today are the 2 points at the bottom of the back page and onto the second page, areas where further conversation is needed. And so we'll be down on those two areas very soon. One final point that I think is important to make is that the teacher certification subcommittee that met in November spent a good deal of time discussing whether the certification field of study would apply to the history 7 through 12 teacher cert, or whether it would apply to social studies, the social studies composite, or whether it would apply to both. And it was a determination of that committee, this is indicated in the minutes, that the teacher certification track B would only apply to history 7 through 12, that it would not apply to social studies. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a bit more explanation. The subcommittee, the teaching certification subcommittee that met, did not feel that it had the expertise to put together a field of study for the social studies composite, because we didn't have people who teach geography, who teach economics, who teach government, and a lot of discussion was spent on the social studies 7 through 12 tests that students take. And if you look through it, there's 7 areas in which students are tested. And so government, geography, economics, so they did not feel that we had enough people from enough fields. So that's why that was pushed to the side, and we focused exclusively on history 7 through 12.
We learned just this morning that next week a committee formed by the coordinating board will be meeting here. It is a multidisciplinary education committee. And we thought that it was appropriate, since this committee did not feel in March that it had the expertise to address social studies, nor did the committee that came in November felt that it could address social studies. We felt that it might be appropriate for this committee to draft a motion that could go to that committee, that multidisciplinary education subcommittee, that we encourage them to consider the social studies field of study. We feel that they would have more, because they're multidisciplinary, they would have more ability to do that. And so, if it's all right, I thought I would propose just a motion that can be amended in any way that you'd like. But I move that this body recommend to the Multidisciplinary Education Committee that they address the, what do we call these, the social studies composite field of study in their deliberations. And we further recommend to their use for that the history courses listed in the ACGM. A second, is there any discussion of that motion? But essentially, we're going to let the multidisciplinary education look at social studies, and we recommend to them our courses. Any discussion? Okay, a second. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you very much. That motion passes unanimously. I think that's a strong message to that committee next week that we would like them to look at it.
And as discussion goes by, if there are particular courses or options or emphases that you feel is appropriate for the social studies composite, it'll be up to that committee, of course, but I'll be happy to pass along your thoughts and recommendations if there's something in particular that you want them to consider.
Now, we come to the major work of this committee, and that is to, having accepted the minutes from the November meeting for our discussion, now to look closely at teacher certification track B, that which was proposed by the committee that met here in November. And what our task is going to be is to look at that and compare it with the teacher track A, that which we proposed in March, and decide whether we want to accept their recommendations. There are key differences between what we proposed and what they proposed, and we're going to be talking a little bit about those differences. The goal would be, over the course of the next little while, hopefully before lunchtime, to, although not restrained to that, of course, to come up with a plan that either accepts in full or in part their recommendations. Essentially, we are acting as a conference committee in some ways, bringing two versions of this field of study together. The first area of consideration that we would propose to you, we had the benefit of meeting this morning ahead of time, and I just would like to say how much I've enjoyed working with Lisa and how
likewise.
fun it is, and we're on the same page in so many areas. And one area that we thought we'd want to talk about first is the addition of Texas history. You'll notice that's the big elephant in the room here. We did not include Texas history in the original, what we call here teacher track A. They did. And the reason they did, and it was by a wide margin, is that 20%, would you want to address that?
So I have a copy of the History 7 through 12 preparation manual that I got off the internet, and one of the things that kept coming up is that a lot of the members of the teaching certification subcommittee were very concerned that we were not making Texas history mandatory when 20% of the History 7 through 12 exam that those who want to become teachers take is Texas history. So over and over we heard Texas history needs to be a required part of this teacher certification degree plan. Yes, 20%.
Yes, by all means.
If I'm not mistaken, part of the problem, if I'm not mistaken, part of the problem in our original discussion is that some institutions offer Texas history at the upper division level and some at the lower division level, and it's the interchangeability of those that's causing the issue. It's not a desire to not require Texas history, which is, I believe, required of every student by state law already, right?
I don't think it's required. No, 6 credits of history.
But it's not part of the lower division requirements. It can be substituted according to state law you can substitute 2301 for either 1301 or 1302.
Got it. I see. Right. So it's one or the other.
Right.
All right. So that is a
Sorry,
question.
I didn't turn my mic on.
No,
You had
appreciate it.
I was just going to repeat what Dr. Hahn said, that a lot of institutions, we do it at the 3,000 level. So it's not that Texas history isn't being covered, it's just being covered at a higher level.
When you say higher level, just for clarification, what does that mean? Because I used to teach
3,000 level, junior
see,
level.
here's the thing where I think it's not as difficult as it may seem. I used to teach, for 7 years, I taught at Texas A&M College Station. And there, Texas history was well, 226, so I guess a 2000 level course. And I taught Texas history at San Antonio College, a community college. It's the exact same course. So one of the things that I know we do in San Antonio, working closely with UTSA, is that a lot of times the history department there, or Mexican American Studies, which is what I'm also a part of, will accept the 2000 level course in lieu of the 3000, because in essence, they're the exact same course. You might have it classified as a 3000 level course, but it's basically the exact same course. I taught it at both places.
I'm not sure if it's the same, I'm sure it's the same course in terms of content. I know we used to have it at the 2000 level, and our students didn't score very well on the tests in the Texas area. We shifted to a 3000 level. We hired some faculty specifically to do that. I don't know if there was a problem going on at a community college in our local area. Maybe it was just something for our institution that we had to deal with. But when we shifted it to a 3000 level and hired faculty specifically to do it, the scores went up in their area on Texas history.
But what's the correlation that it's moving it up to the 3000 level? That's the explanation why they did
They were
better. Maybe it's
doing-
better
One of the
faculty.
things I know they did was they did more research with primary documents
We do that.
than they had been doing. Well, not where we were.
Yeah, so that might just, to me, sounds like it could be an issue with the local community college, like working more closely with them, making sure that they're teaching that. But you had your point.
So one of the things I noticed on the teaching certification courses document, the Excel sheet, was that for UTEPs it is incorrect. So UT El Paso is our primary partner institution for El Paso Community College. They do require Texas history for both. They make a distinguish a history major with a secondary education minor or a history social studies composite. And so they're slightly different tracks, but both of those tracks require what they call History 3317, so it's Texas history. They will not take 23, whatever Texas history is in the ACE.
2301.
2301. I get confused because UTEP calls World History 1 2301.
Oh.
They will not take it. We have had students take the syllabus from the community college. It's identical to the one at UTEP, and UTEP says no. And there it's an issue of turf. For them, and every student who takes it at EPCC is one less butt in their seats at UTEP. So they will not take it. So if this field of study passes as it is, we're not going to be able to use it for our situation, because no amount of negotiation has ever resolved this. And I think it's, again, as Michael's talking about, an issue of, some schools really do make this distinction between how they teach it as differently. And then, transferability, like that was the big bugaboo that we kept talking about in the March meeting, is that so many schools are so picky about this that it seems irresponsible to include it in this track if there's a lot of students who aren't going to be able to do it.
Before we get to you, did someone over here have their hand up before? No? Okay.
I don't mind at all waiting. Oh, no,
Oh, yeah,
go ahead.
I need clarification about our purpose, because I thought our purpose was to decide which courses universities must accept from the community colleges,
Lower division courses.
lower division courses for transfer.
Right.
Is our purpose to decide what's required for teacher certification?
But that,
No.
wait, what do you mean by
Is our
teacher
purpose to
certification?
decide what future teachers must take? No. Universities decide that, and universities require Texas history. So our university does, and I imagine most do, because that's, as you said, 20% of the test. So this idea that we're not requiring Texas history is not what our point is.
Well, that's not the point they were making. They were just
They are
saying,
making that point. They're saying that, oh my gosh, you're not requiring teachers to take Texas history? Oh
they're
no,
talking
what are
about
you
transfer
doing?
students. So we're talking here about the students coming from
I know.
my level, the community college. So they just want to know that those community college students going to the university,
If they're going to become,
if they've taken it,
Sorry.
if they have the ability to take it, the students are going to want to take it at my level because it's cheaper. And so just making sure that it's an option. So it was more about making sure, well, not an option, that it's so important. So we don't want to hinder the community college student. Because the native students are going to
understand
take it
that.
at some point.
I apologize for interrupting.
No, I
just-
interrupted you first, so
It's frustrating to me because we keep getting off on this discussion of 2,000 versus 3,000. That doesn't matter. The purpose of our meeting is to decide what courses will transfer. And Texas history, if we're talking about what future teachers must take, teachers will take Texas history.
Yeah, whether it's
Universities-
on this degree plan or not, they will end up taking
they
it.
will take it. And so, yes, they could take it at the community college and it could transfer. That's great. But we shouldn't put it on there as a list of things that universities must accept because of the issue of 2,000 versus 3,000. If a student comes to us with one 2,000 level course, our major requires two 3,000 level Texas histories. That means that that student that takes that course at Tarrant College, for example, will come to UTA and we'll tell them, well, yeah, you can count that as an elective, but you're going to need to take our courses because that's what we require for our majors. And so I think we need to stop talking about what's required for teacher certification because that's not our purpose. Our purpose should be which courses should students take at the community college level that will provide a smooth transfer to the college level.
If I could add just very, very briefly, I agree with what you just said. I think the field of study is to provide the basic baseline of knowledge. Now, the question is there a different baseline of knowledge required of those entering teacher cert from those entering into an academic history field? That's a major question we have. The second thing that was made more clear to me in the November meeting, and perhaps you all know this, this was something we started the November meeting with, and I don't think we started our March meeting with, is the fact that whatever we decide today are those courses that four-year institutions must accept, and then in addition to that, a four-year institution may not require any additional lower division hours beyond the field of study. So this works well in institutions like my own where Texas history has recently been downgraded from a 3,000 to a 2,000 level course because now we will accept the 2,000 level course and we can require nothing else. It is a bit tricky for those institutions where Texas history is offered as a 3,000 level course because just as you mentioned, Andrew, the student coming in with this will not be required to take any additional 2,000 level courses, but will have to take two additional courses in Texas history on a higher level.
Turn my mic on this time. And this is a dumb question, but it's not really a question. It's more of a clarification. So what you're saying, y'all downgraded it to a 2,000 level course. You have it as a 3,000 level course. So if we eliminate it from, irrelevant for my thing. Sorry, I got it wrong, but it's irrelevant for my hypothetical here. So they required it at 3,000 level. You required it at the 2,000 level, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we take it off of this, wouldn't the onus then just fall back on the student to understand their transfer institution? And if they were transferring to your school, they could take it at Tarrant County College, and if they were transferring to UTEP, they wouldn't. Right? I mean, am I missing something there? Or is my understanding of that correct? That's my question.
I think it's, yeah.
The problem might be, since the field of study represents the entire lower division requirements for the degree program, a receiving institution can't add anything more to it. So if if a student is transferring to a university that only has Texas history at the lower division, then that student would be complete with their lower division requirements and could quite possibly graduate and take a certification exam without having taken any Texas history course because the institution doesn't even offer it at the upper division, and they can't require the student to take it. So if that's the problem. And if an institution like UTEP offers it only at the upper division level and they don't want to accept the transfer course from a community college, Well, this time they'll have state law telling them that they must accept and apply towards a degree all the courses in the field of study. Now, it is true that they could decide to use the lower division Texas history as an elective and make the student take the course content again at the upper division. That's their call. I think that would be unfortunate, and I think that people at UTEP would have to seriously discuss that, because if they don't accept it as the equivalent, they're going to have to find 3 hours of upper division courses somewhere else in their degree program to push aside to make room for the lower division Texas history. And they're going to have to decide, do we want to sacrifice upper division level class to make room for a student having to take the same course content twice? And if they think their upper division level course is so distinct and different, then that's okay. That might be. I'm not questioning that. But they'll have the added pressure of state law on one side and carving a big 3-hour hole in their degree plan on the other side, pressuring them to say, you know, really, this is a course that is accepted as equivalency all across the state at other institutions. Maybe we should get on that boat. So institutions who do teach it at the upper division will likely be accepting this one if you put it in the field of study as the equivalent. I would expect that would be largely the case.
Many of you have made my points already. This issue of the transferability is the one that I'm facing right now, and I'm looking at notes from my faculty senate, because it is this issue that is threatening the accreditation of every higher education institution in the state of Texas. I think that in history it makes sense. This is a body of courses we all understand are interchangeable, even if certain skills are offered in different places. And also I speak from a position of complete with the student who wishes to take cheaper courses and transfer them to the four-year institution. I'm not against any of that. But if my institution has to accept as complete a field of study and not be allowed to require a single additional lower division class, this is a problem when, for example, organic chemistry is a lower division class, and these students are getting into medical school without it. I think this is a question outside of our remit, but I also think that from the perspective of the four-year institution, it's a very serious issue. I'll stop there. I didn't want to not have said it when I spoke to my faculty senate about it.
Thank you very much.
Over here, yes. Okay, coming from the community college and being one of those professors that teach Texas history, I would like to defend my field. I would put my Texas history, my 2301 class up against a 3000, because we do, in addition to their textbook, they actually have to buy a primary document Texas history book. And so we do that. And the students that go to my community college are coming to my community college because, like we said, is because they can't afford 4 years at a four-year university, and they're trying to get as many classes as they can. And granted, I don't get a whole lot of history majors, but I get a few that it's complicated because, like you said, they'll take it. So I'm down in Galveston. Our closest college is University of Houston Clear Lake, which will take it, but University of Houston main campus won't take it. So it's even within the same system. That's what we're running into, because we're trying to put up our field of studies for community college if you're coming in. And so we have like 14 different transfer plans. 2 of them, Texas history's on it. The other ones aren't, because they won't. But if we're trying to get students out as fast as possible with the least amount of, I don't want to say useless electives, but things that count toward the major, and as cheap as they can. Overlap. I think Texas history's got to be in there. So, but that's coming from a community college kind of perspective.
I just have 2 points and then 1 question. First, I want to echo Barbara Hahn's comments that the response I've received from the faculty is, you know, everyone's terrified and freaking out that the field of study program as a whole will involve the loss of accreditation of our university. This is a question that's beyond my pay grade.
There is a letter from the accrediting body on my hard drive here.
There is a letter.
It's not as if I'm making this up as a potential threat. They have said that it is threatening the accreditation of every institution of higher education in the state of Texas.
Yeah, and I can say that I know that the coordinating board did respond to that letter. However, it's the opinion of UT Dallas that the response is insufficient and is kind of irrelevant to the charges that are being brought by the accrediting body. So again, this is above my pay grade. I don't think it's my position as a junior faculty member on one field of study to tank the entire initiative. But again, I think it does need to be on the record that there are some really serious concerns about the initiative as a whole. Now, that being said, quick comment on this 2,000 and 3,000 level. I will say that at UT Dallas, so first of all, Texas history is at the 2,000 level for us. So this is actually kind of irrelevant for me personally, but I will say that there is a substantial difference at UT Dallas between a 2,000 and 3,000 level course. 3,000 level courses require at least 25 pages of writing, require what's defined as advanced historiographical engagement. So not just dealing with primary sources, but also being aware of competing historiographies and expressing that through extended writing assignments. So I just would say that 2,000 level courses can be thoroughly rigorous, but they are not 3,000 level courses. And if we are deciding that we want to kind of coerce four-year colleges into accepting them anyway, we should just be aware that there is a substantial pedagogical difference for many institutions between that. And then my one question just about this, as I'm looking at the difference between the March Advisory Committee, Trac A, and the November Subcommittee, Trac B, we have two of the following courses. The March committee had 2321 and 2322, which I assume if we're choosing from two, you're taking those two. My question is this actually adding a required course, or is Texas history just become an option and you would choose two of three from 2301, 2321?
I apologize for this. This is very misleading. The columns are meant to be read straight down, so we're not reading across. So, so the academic field of study is a 12-hour field of study, U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, and two of the following. Trac A is a 12-hour field of study. Certification Trac B is a 15-hour field of study. You have choice in the first two areas, and then you take the following three courses: Texas history and the world civs. So it is very misleading, but it's columns and not to be read across.
Okay, so going back to maybe my first point of the kind of big picture concern about the Field of Study Initiative, I was given kind of two charges for my institution. One, if there's a way that you can prevent this terrible thing from happening to us, please try to prevent it, which I think I can't, and I'm not going to, throw myself on the tracks here. But if it is going to happen, please do try to keep the required credits as low as possible to wreak the least amount of havoc. So adding 3 courses to a field of study is a major concern. I know that we had in the public comments from UT Austin a request to keep it to 9. It sounds like we're kind of dismissing that concern, but if we have to have 12, having 12 versus 15, 12 is a lot easier to swallow than 15. Sorry.
Wait, over there.
So I had a question because El Paso Community College actually had a meeting in October, November about fields of study, and they presented something, and I wanted to ask whether it is in fact a correct interpretation. So they said the fields of study would be suggestions, so that degree, like for example, like let's say we did adopt Trac B, right? However, if we did an associate in history with teacher certification, if we developed, we're in the process of developing an associate's in history degree at UPCC. If we did that, we could align with that, or we could choose not to, like say in the case of Texas history because of its problematic. So is that true that the fields of studies are suggestions and not have to be taken as gospel in our 2-year degree plans?
Alan, that's a question for you.
Strictly speaking, yes, it is a suggestion because the fields of study only apply to transfer students going from one institution to another. If a student stays at the same institution as a native student from their first year through degree, then the field of study does not have to apply to them. And that goes for associate degree students as well. So an associate degree plan does not have to equal the field of study. I think you can see logically the benefits of having it aligned with the field of study, because that way, if a student decides to not end their program with the associate degree and to go on for a baccalaureate, then they can transport their entire degree over and enter a university as a junior. If they have taken a different selection of classes and the field of study is incomplete, then the receiving institution can ask them to take additional courses, and it might take them additional time to get the degree. So I think there's an incentive to align them, but there is nothing in state law that says that a community college has to make their associate degree plan equal the field of study for that discipline. It's not unimaginable that that could become state law at some point, but that's not the way it is now.
Yeah, because the reason I had asked that was because if it was just a suggestion, then let's say, we certified Trac B, we still can't get our students credit for that Texas history class, so we just tell them not to take it and tell them to wait to UTEP. But then what you're saying is their field of study is not complete. UTEP could compel them to take more classes. So they're kind of in a catch-22. They take the Texas history class, so their field of study is complete, but it's just going to get shoved into their electives, and they're going to have to retake it. It's just like, do they retake the same class? Is that the additional class they take? Or do they, so they don't retake it, not take it, but then they might be compelled to take other classes?
True. Well, if an associate degree plan has all of the field of study and then maybe a few courses more, then that's fine, because then their field of study is still complete and they can transfer. But
they'll still have to take the Texas history class.
But if they don't take it, if they don't take Texas history at the
They're
community
very
college
stubborn.
level, then UTEP could have them take it anyway. But again, that doesn't really change anything, because if UTEP only offers it at the upper division, the field of study doesn't touch upper division courses at all. We can't require it, we can't recommend it. That's totally in the purview of the university. So even if, as I said before, even if Texas history is in the field of study, if UTEP decides or another institution decides or UT Dallas decides that our Texas history at the upper division level is so substantially different, then we can ask our students to repeat some of the course content, no harm done, and they can take the same course content twice. That's your call, depending on your assessment of the lower division course and the upper division course.
I think my concern is just that we know from our last meeting in March that a lot of universities just don't have very many credits required at the lower level, and then they don't have very many credits in the electives allowable for the lower level anymore. So like, for example, to get a history degree at UT El Paso, they require the American history sequence and the world history sequence. Those are the only lower division history classes they require. And then they get 6 elective hours allowed at the lower credit. All other elective hours have to be at the junior or senior level. So that's the problem, is like, if you're shoving Texas history in there, we never have the perfect student who never has extra classes. So that's my concern.
Well, let me remind you of something that I hope I told you at the first meeting, that might go to your point and also Ben's point as well, that there's a fine line that the committee needs to walk about the size of a field of study. It's a tightrope you have to walk. There are advantages and disadvantages to having too few semester credit hours and too many. Okay, the disadvantage of having too few semester credit hours, and I would say to UT Dallas, be careful what you wish for, because if there are only 9 or 6 semester credit hours in a field of study, remember that it is the complete set of lower division requirements, and you cannot ask that transfer students to do more than what's in the field of study. So just because there are few hours in a field of study doesn't mean that gives necessarily universities much more flexibility to say, oh, good, well, then we can have them take our lower division requirements and prerequisites in A, B, C, D, and E, because now we've got room at the lower division. Nuh-uh. The student is done when they're done with the field of study. So you want to make sure that everything they need at the lower division is in the field of study, because when they're finished, they're finished. On the other hand, if the field of study has too many semester credit hours, then you are going to be, there's only 120 hours max in the whole baccalaureate degree plan. And if you have 21 semester credit hours, 24 semester credit hours in the field of study, that's okay if you really believe in your gut that that's what lower division students have to have. This is the case in engineering and music and some of the other fields that have very large fields of study. The bad part of that is that asks upper division institutions to carve pretty deep into their upper division level requirements, sometimes cutting some really key important courses or any student choice at all in their electives, which is a shame to lose, in order to keep that student in the 120 hours. So you want to get it down the line, what students need to know, but not much less, more or less than that, and not much more than that. And hopefully you can get it right down the line. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'd like to make a point that is, I think, obvious to all of us, but perhaps needs to be stated, is that the target audience for the academic field of study and the teacher Cert B are very different. The ability of institutions to accommodate lower division credit for those two students is also different. So in the academic field of study, for example, at my institution, I really only have 3 hours that I can play with as lower division hours in our degree plan. This current 12-hour, so I would fall into that category with UT Austin and say, wait, we need a 9-hour thing. I figured out a way to accommodate an additional 3 hours. This 12-hour program in the academic field of study that we came up with in March, I can make work. But it's a stretch, but I can make it work. Looking at the teacher certification, there's a very different set of problems with that at my institution, because they actually have many, many lower division requirements, far in excess of the 15 that we require here. And the problem, or the 12 that we required in March, the problem is going to be, and the headache is going to be, and this is a headache that luckily I don't have to have, I can push it off on the Dean of Education at my institution, is that they will have to figure out how they're going to elevate certain lower division courses to upper division courses so as to continue to require them, because they will not be able to require certain lower division hours in their teacher cert area, because if someone comes in with a field of study complete, they cannot take any more lower division hours for the degree. So all of this is to say, I completely agree with Ben's point when it comes to the academic field of study, that we need to keep our hours limited for that population. I'm a little more open to a larger, slightly larger field of study, a 15-hour field of study in the teacher cert side of things, just because the requirements of the degree are different, and there's a little more room for lower division hours, at least at my institution, for teacher cert people. If someone were to suggest a 15-hour field of study in the academic field of study, that's a non-starter. That there's no room. But there is in that other group of students.
Barbara, you had your hand up earlier.
The transferability within the field of study, or of the field of study package, all makes sense. It's the requirement that all those hours be applied to the degree plan that I think is the sticking point.
And something that's helped me is they can be applied to, and we discussed this in March, they can be applied to the core. And so we did some heavy dipping into the core in both of the fields of study that we suggested. They can apply to the major, which is where we'd rather not, in many cases, rather not go, or they could be applied to electives. But Alan makes a really good point that we have to keep in mind the 120, that we cannot have too big of a field of study that it infringes on the 120.
Can I just ask, Barbara, you mentioned the accreditation, and I think I didn't understand the accreditation problem with this Texas history. Can you clarify what that is for me?
Let me open the letter.
Oh.
This is from SACSCOC, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges, to the Commissioner of Higher Education. They also sympathize with the student and the 60 by 30 plan and so on, but Standard 10.4 academic governance expects an institution to provide evidence that it A, publishes and implements policies on the authority of faculty in academic and governance matters, let me try to summarize
Yeah, I was
instead of
gonna
just
say, I
reading
think
the
I'm a
whole
little
thing.
lost.
Sorry, historian. The problem is sort of twofold. It's faculty control of content and of curriculum for the students graduating under their aegis at an institution. So that makes it a faculty governance issue. And that applies to the standard 10.8, evaluating and awarding academic credit. Can I award academic credit for a course I haven't taught? And can I be the one to make that judgment? I can. So then the question, I as an individual can, this is the status we're in now. My department can say, oh, is that applicable? Does that work? Now we're trying to standardize that so I no longer have that control. Me as faculty member, as generic faculty member. And this is an issue in terms of faculty governance and control. But that leads to the larger question, or maybe it's a smaller question, of, let me see where I'm going, faculty control of content, policies for awarding credit. Sorry, I should have gathered my thoughts more carefully. Here it is. If I, as a generic faculty member or the advisors my institution has appointed to evaluate the content for which credit is granted, then this body is not representative. Here I'm at the top of the second page. The comparability of the credit experience when designating the course being transcribed by the receiving institution. Again, the primary concern expressed by Saxe-Cock member institutions is that the advisory committees are neither broadly representative nor responsive to the formally expressed concerns of institutions and their educational program faculty. So, that's the content of the problem. I can quote the issues.
We heard just Friday, hot off the press, we got a response from Saxe to the coordinating board's letter about that. They said that they found no inconsistency between Saxe policy and the state policy on how fields of study are generated. Rex Peebles, our assistant commissioner, came in this morning and just showed me this letter. He just got it himself. He's going to stop in later this morning when he's free, and if it's all right, I'd like to table that and let Rex speak to it, because Rex was the one who wrote that letter. The commissioner signed it, but Rex prepared it along with the commissioner, and we've considered this very seriously here at the coordinating board, all the way up and down, top levels, and we've taken these concerns extremely seriously, and Rex can speak to what the commissioner said to Saxe, what Saxe in turns responded to us, and take your questions on that. So if that's all right, we can wait till Rex comes down. I'll make sure to grab him before we leave.
I just want to ask if you could distribute that email so I could send it to our administration kind of contact.
Sounds good to me. I'll have to give Rex's go ahead on that. I don't see why not, but yeah.
Great.
We'll see if Rex can distribute a copy of that response.
Great, thanks.
Great.
And I just wanted to make sure that I understand. I don't want to keep belaboring the point based upon what Alan just said, but when you're talking about faculty governance and control and awarding academic credit, is it that you're giving academic credit for a course that you haven't personally taught but someone in a community college taught?
That I haven't taught, that no one in my institution has any control over what it is or any content thereof, I think is the general issue. It's not a matter of what the institution is. I have nothing but respect for the teachers at community colleges and for their students. But it's a matter of, can I certify that this person knows this when the course is taken at an institution other than mine?
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. I guess I'm trying to think of our community college student and how do we best serve them? You know, I understand university faculty might not have a good relationship or a close relationship with the local community colleges, but I feel like there has to be some way where we think of the community college students' reasons for coming to community colleges, and I'll just leave it at that.
Let me say that I agree 100%. This is an issue of This is a larger issue, I
Yeah.
think, than, and I'm entirely in sympathy with both the professors and the students. And some of my best students come from South Plains Community College, no two ways about it.
This is, I really appreciate you bringing these things to our attention. And essentially, it's a discussion over who has the power to certify a course, who has the power to say that this course counts and doesn't count. And essentially, what we're saying is that if whatever we put into this must be accepted by an institution, and we're taking away their ability to compare it for comparability matters in their own. So it's a very, very important issue. And we could say the whole thing's bogus and leave, but I paid for lunch, and so I paid for lunch. So I think we should. Hey, we could go. We could have lunch somewhere else. So I think while these are very important issues, I am heartened by the fact that I do want to ask Rex about this letter that they received, and if that is the case, then I think we can still continue this conversation, that if the SACS's objections have been addressed. That brings us back to Texas history.
Over there.
Well, before we go there, can I just make one real quick point? Because it seems to me the conversation that we're having today is very different than the conversation we had in November. And I think it's partially because we have different people at the table. What we had in November was a conversation not about transferability, which is a very important issue, and I think is really the heart of what our decision is going to be about this course. But the conversation we had in November had to do with preparation of the student, because the understanding of the which may be a flawed understanding, but the understanding I have of the field of study is that it should be the basic preparation of the student, provide the student with the basic information and skills to transfer to a four-year institution and find success. And the baseline for what those skills and knowledge base should be, at least for our friends in November, was the requirements of the test, the requirements of the certification test. And there they argued that because 20% of the test was Texas history, therefore Texas history should be among the requirements. Now, no one assumes that just because it's in the requirements that they'll get all of that knowledge. I think there's a very good argument to be made that Texas history should be taught in the upper division course, as an upper division course, and that's where the knowledge base will be mostly kind of placed down. Nevertheless, I have a number here, something like over 10,000 students in the last year that we have reporting from took Texas history at the lower division. It's a large group of people. I think it's second only to the U.S. History Survey in terms of the number of students who take this course. And so the argument was it affects a lot of kids. A lot of kids take it at community colleges, and it's on the test. Therefore, it should go into the field of study. The argument today is not really about that. It's about transferability questions, about this 2,000 level course and how it will interact with 3,000 level courses in four-year institutions. And I think we have to weigh and balance both sides of that argument. We have to understand that large numbers of people are already taking this. Large numbers of institutions are already grappling with transfer issues with this course. Some, as we've seen at El Paso, are not accepting it. This is not a new issue. We're not inventing a new issue. We're just perhaps bringing the issue to the forefront. I mean, I do think anything we put in a field of study will directly impact what two-year institutions offer and what four-year institutions accept. That's just the fact of the matter.
Yes, I'll echo that this committee is very influential about deciding, really, where a course belongs. Does it belong at the upper division level or the lower division level? The psychology committee argued for an entire day, as well they should, about whether abnormal psychology and brain physiology courses needed to be moved from the upper division level to the lower division level. Almost everybody taught them at the upper division level. Some even taught it at the graduate level before you got into brain physiology. But the committee decided that the course content was so crucial for anyone going into psychology that they needed to get it in their first 2 years. They needed to be exposed to it. They needed to be aware of it. They needed to have it as a foundation for all further courses. So they yanked it from the upper division and put it in the lower division and added it to the ACGM. So that's just an example of what these committees have the authority to do. So I'll echo that it's a very crucial decision. You are in some ways deciding for many institutions who aren't already firmly committed to their upper division level course in Texas history. If you put it in the field of study, it's likely to be taught at the lower division from this point forward at most institutions. Certainly for the transfer students, what they do for their native students is their own issue. And of course, Texas history is already obviously in the ACGM, so you're not making that radical of a step. This is a course that, as Jacob said, is often taught. Thousands and thousands and thousands of students in the state already take it at the lower division level.
Just to clarify very quickly, thank you. So that's an excellent point. And when we say that it's in the field of study, just to emphasize, this is a field of study that only impacts students that are teacher cert in history 7 through 12. And I don't have numbers on that, but that is a much smaller number than the academic field of study. It's also a much smaller number than the social studies, which is yet undetermined. So this is a small segment of the population for which a test is given that 20% of the test covers Texas history. I'm sorry, I stepped on your toes, so please go ahead.
I just had a question because for whatever reason, I'm drawing a blank and I can't find the information. What courses under Texas state law are allowed to be substituted for 1301 and 1302? Is Texas history one of them?
Yes.
What about just putting for the schools that have transfer issues, Texas history as an or? Like Teacher Trac B has with Mexican American history, U.S. history or Mexican American history.
We're going to have a conversation about that in a few minutes about the or there. There are some that was a very contentious debate. It passed by one vote. It's something that we need to revisit, I think, and we can bring that up in that time.
Just Texas history is the only one that could be substituted in Texas state law, or is it also Mexican American history?
Mexican American history 1 and 2 can be substituted.
think
2327 for 1301 and 2328 can be substituted for 1302.
And there are 33 some courses at UT Austin that count toward the history core as well. I mean, institutions can count.
Because if we're talking about, not wanting to overload the lower division credit hours, if we just made it or, then that would give maximum flexibility to both the community colleges and universities too.
Well, I hate to do this. Should we? I don't think. I get the impression that we're not ready to completely stop a conversation about Texas history. So I think what we should do is perhaps we should pivot to I'll just be honest with you, the kind of the general areas of conversation for us today, the inclusion of Texas history, the inclusion of World Civ, which we agreed with prior. I don't think there's any conversation there. Maybe, but I don't think we agreed with it earlier on. And then this whether it's U.S. history or Mexican American history 1 and 2, or if it's just U.S. history. That's our area of disagreement from our teacher Trac A. We said just U.S. history 1 and 2. They said or. So not wanting to take a vote on Texas history, because I don't think we're ready to, and you provide an excellent segue to saying maybe we should include Texas history in the or category up here. Is it all right if we pivot to a conversation about the or?
Table this? Oh, you mean just,
Let's
keep talking about Texas history.
Let's
Okay.
table the vote on
Yes.
Texas history. Let's table the vote on Texas history, and let's pivot to the question of the or here about between U.S. history 1 and 2 and Mexican American history, because I don't feel that we're really ready to vote on whether we want to include Texas history yet. I think we might need to talk about something else for a few minutes, and then Texas history will look easy. Oh, please help yourself.
A little break?
I'll bring it to you. I'll bring it to you.
Shall we stop for a little 5-minute break? There's some coffee, bathroom break. Okay, thanks. For those in the booth, we'll stand adjourned until 11:05. Thanks. Thank you much. I appreciate Rex Peebles, our Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce, to come down and join us for a few minutes. I referred the question about the complaint that was made by some institutions to SACS about the question of faculty governance and the viability of the field of study and how it may or may not threaten accreditation. This was very carefully reviewed, as I said, at all levels of the coordinating board administration here. Rex helped draft a letter which the commissioner signed to SACS, and SACS just wrote us a response just on Friday in light of that. So I'll let Rex summarize what went on with that and take some of your questions about it.
So I'm sure you're all aware of the initial letter that went from someone in Texas to SACS, questioning compliance with particularly the SACS principles around transfer of credit and faculty control of curriculum. Right? And so in response to that letter, then a letter was sent to the commissioner asking, basically asking, so what's going on in Texas? And so then I worked on a draft response for the commissioner back to SACS, and I don't know how many of you've seen that. Apparently somebody has, because didn't you tell me that there was some complaint that it was incomplete or something?
I saw the SACS letter.
Which I would actually like to know about. My first response was like 4 pages long, which was, I thought was actually more than complete. But the one we actually sent to SACS, though, was about 1.5 pages long. So, yeah, if you've seen it, then you know that. So then on what basis are you complaining it was incomplete, if I could ask? I'm just trying to understand why you thought it was incomplete.
I got a message from the assistant provost at UT Dallas that,
okay.
that's where this is coming from.
Okay. So I'll ask her.
Right.
Thank you. I'm just curious about that more than anything else. But anyway, so we crafted a response back to SACS from the initial letter that was sent. And it turned out it was about 1.5 pages long, if I remember correctly. And if I can, and I'm sure I've got it up there somewhere.
I'll let everybody.
And we'll make sure that everybody gets one, so you can see for yourself what that was. In that, I essentially, we sort of laid out what the process was within a 1.5 pages. Like I said, my initial response was, I think it was about 3.5 pages long, because I put every detail in there I could remember or make up, as the case is. And so in detailing the process, the statute, the rules, the process, and everything else, and then we sort of trimmed that to 1.5 pages. But I think it at least caught the essence of how this is done, and we talked about the fact that it's committee work made up of 24, and explained that process a little bit, and so forth, and then we got the response back from SACS late last Friday afternoon, or I saw it late last Friday afternoon. I don't know exactly when we got it, but I saw it late last Friday afternoon. Anyway, saying that they did not see an issue. And so I think there's a couple of things to kind of keep in mind about this. One is just the unique nature of Texas. This kind of work has been done in any number of other states, but it's almost always done, or so far it's been done in a state that typically has a system. And so Kansas, I think, is one of the most recent that I can remember where this kind of work was done. But Kansas has a single system of higher education. Everybody in higher education in Kansas belongs to the same system, to the Kansas, whatever it's called. I don't know, I can't remember if it's called the Kansas State System or University of Kansas. Anyway, whatever it's called, they all belong to one system. And inside our own systems, of which, keep in mind that there are 61 in the state of Texas, so that really complicates the idea of doing it within a system, because we have 61 of them. But even then, we haven't, by and large, not done this work inside our own systems. Okay, as the Vice Chancellor eloquently put it to me one time, we have X number of institutions in our system, and I guarantee you that no two of them do anything alike. Which is not really true. I mean, there are there are a lot of similarities, but there are also a lot of significant and a lot of differences between the two. And I think part of that's just the culture that Texas has grown up in, and that is that, you know, we have a 100-plus year history of everybody doing whatever they want to do. And, you know, and so that's what everybody has done. That's what they're used to. And so everybody's used to these decisions being made based on sometimes by a single faculty member, sometimes by a department, but rarely by anything greater than that. And those decisions are oftentimes ratified by faculty councils or, you know, academic councils and that kind of stuff. But the locus of the decision-making has always been at the departmental level, if not at an individual faculty level sometimes. And so it's as I've told other people, I mean, I think part of this is a real cultural change. I mean, it's a very different way to do business in this regard than has been done in Texas before. And so, you know, change is hard, particularly hard in higher education for whatever the reason. I've been a part of it for 30-plus years, and so I get all that. And I certainly understand it. I don't necessarily agree with it all the time, but I certainly understand it, I think. And so, but I think that's sort of the genesis of it. And I think that, you know, the question then becomes one of faculty control. Well, we have tried to be very careful about making sure that field of study committees are made up of faculty and or people who are, if they're in a supervisory role, they're directly connected to that discipline in terms of either supervising it and or having and still teaching in it, for that matter. So we've tried to be very careful about that. Part of the problem in a big state is that it's hard to have everybody at the table at once. I mean, and I recognize that that's a shortcoming of the process, because you have, you know, history is something that, for example, is something that all 50 community colleges teach. One of the TSTCs teaches it, and all of our systems teach it, all 6 systems, all universities. I mean, all 37 GAIs, I think, have a bachelor's degree in history, so it's widespread. But, you know, having a committee made up of 87 is, well, it's just not feasible, right? I mean, we've all served on a lot of committees, and you know, the most efficient committee of all typically is a committee of one. And even then, if that one person is indecisive, that doesn't even work very well, okay? So, you know, committees are just fraught with their own, you know, problems, democracy being what it is. And I'm a political scientist by training, so that's all of my degrees are in political science, so I sometimes throw those kind of analogies in there somewhere for good or bad, and whether they really work or not. And then, so one of the things that we are going to do somewhat differently going forward is that we've had heretofore, the committees make their decisions, they go out for public comment, they come back. Those public comments are then distilled to both the chairs and the committee again. And we've used this sort of ballot process, I think, and part of that is because we've been under a lot of pressure to try to get the top 25 transfer degrees done by the start of the next legislative session, which is tomorrow. And we're not going to make it, and that's okay, because I think sometimes one needs to step back a little bit and let people digest this a little bit more. So one of the things we're going to do going forward is if we get any substantive comments at all, then we will always bring the committee back to review those. And so it'll slow the process down, but I think it will actually make it a better process in the long run. The other thing is that we've made a commitment to revisit these. I often get asked the question of, are these set in stone? And I think part of that stems from what happened before, where there were, I think, 10 of these developed back in the 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago now. I forget exactly when, and there were 10 developed, and they were just sort of there. They were put out, and that was the end of it. And except for the Associate of Arts in Teaching fields of study, they were never revisited until this round got started up again. And so I think part of the problem is that then they not only fall into disuse, but they fall into disuse because they may not be applicable, truly applicable anymore. And so I think that part of going forward is that we'll try to make sure that these are reviewed. We've committed to a 5-year schedule for these, but we've also committed that if the field thinks they should be reviewed earlier, then we'll bring a committee back together and take another look at them. And what I would hope over the long run is that these eventually wind up in a lot of serious, and I know this happens already, by the way, so don't take this as being a purely negative comment, but I know that there's also a lot of time spent on the angst of we do it this way and you do it some other way, and we would only do it if it was the right way to do it. And I get all that. I mean, I suffer from the same kind of complexes myself, right? I mean, whatever I do, I wouldn't do it if it wasn't the right way to do it. And therefore, if you're doing it some other way, then it must be wrong, right? I mean, that's just human nature to a great extent. And so there are a lot of really good conversations that do happen around what is it that students really need to know at the lower division level to be successful at the upper division level. And what I would hope is over time that's what these really become conversations about, and so that institutions are actually talking to each other. And this kind of work has been going on for, I don't know, dozens of years through articulation agreements and voluntary compacts and all kinds of other things. And what separates this, quite frankly, and I get the angst around this as well, is that this is a statewide initiative, brought about by legislative fiat, if you will. And I understand how that creates concern on people's part. When these things first came out 10 or 12, 13 years ago, I probably expressed some of the same concerns that were then around, because the only committee I served on was I did serve on an AAT committee, the initial Associate of Arts and Teaching degree committee, as I think I was a dean then, whatever I was. Anyway, doesn't really matter, but so hopefully that will go around. I think the issues that surround transfer sometimes are quite legitimate. And I think people have legitimate concerns about whether the students that are coming to them are fully prepared or not. You want them to be. They need to be if they're going to be successful. I would hate to see any of this result in some sort of lowering of standards. If anything, we need to be raising them, not lowering them. So I think part of that conversation, the really good conversations that can take place between 2- and 4-year institutions, or for that matter, between 4-year and 4-year institutions, about what really students need to know to be successful, and how do you affect that in the classroom and make that happen, regardless of where they are or where they're coming from and where they're going to, then I think that's an important conversation for the success of students and for the success of the programs themselves overall. And I think I worked with SACS for a lot of years. I've been on a lot of committees and done a lot of committee work and that kind of stuff. And I think that, there's a couple of things going on here. One is that they recognize that they have to look at state law very delicately. It's very different from looking at the policy of a college. But I think in this case, they reviewed what they were doing. If someone thinks we gave an incomplete response to SACS on this, then I'll ask about this, because I realize you guys may not know where all this is coming from. So I'll ask about this, and if that's true, then I think we need to do something to help clear the air with SACS more. And if they have a concern, then I'd be happy to do that, because I want to make sure that they don't have any concerns, at least as much as that's humanly possible anyway. So, and I'd be glad to try to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. I have just one point of clarification. The letter that you received, or that you saw from SACS on Friday, did not indicate any concerns, or it with the policies or procedures of the fields of study?
No.
Good. Good. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Will that letter reach my provost, my faculty senate? I assume it's addressed to the commissioner, but
It is
I think
addressed
they'd
to-
like to see it.
Yeah, I'm sure
I
they
don't want
would, and
to.
we'll figure out a way to send that to the. Well, probably what we'll do. I mean, we send a lot of stuff to presidents, chancellors, VP, chief academic officers, chief instructional officers, and liaisons, and I will ask about. I mean, since it went to the commissioner, I'll need his permission to send this on, but I don't think there'll be an issue there. And then what we can do is then send that on to the sort of normal distribution that we have. And we'll make sure you guys get it. And Alan will make sure that the committee gets a copy. I mean, we'll distribute it as widely as we can, sure.
And my second point, I think, speaks to what Ben and I were speaking about a moment ago, which is this issue of sort of requiring things at the lower division level, and that your Texas history class, it's less about it being better and more about it serving particular upper division purposes in terms of writing requirements and research requirements and so on. So I'm wondering if part of this process is just having the individual institutions adjust what they teach at the lower and upper division level, meaning it's possible over the years to create a different class than Texas history that provides the same requirements of majors and then require and so on. But if that's true, is it possible to have some years, a year or two, for each institution to adjust what it requires based on these laws? Thank you.
Well, so, I mean, I think, first of all, I think you're absolutely correct about, and this is part of what I was trying to get at talking about these conversations, that over the long run, there is a better alignment of lower and upper. Now, Texas history is kind of interesting in a way because the lower division Texas history course was put there initially to act as a substitute, right, for 6 of the hours that you're supposed to have in American history, which has been a legislative mandate since the 1930s, I believe. And so because we all know that in Texas history is just as, if not more important than American history is, right? Because, I mean, okay, so, now good or bad, right or wrong, that kind of perception, though, I think drove that idea. And so it was designed to be, and I think it's actually, and that part of it is actually explicitly mentioned in statute, that Texas history can be substituted. Now, as a coordinating board over the years, there's been also the idea that could also be substitute. You could use Mexican American or African American history to substitute for that as well, as long as it had an American history focus. I was on the academic course guide manual years ago when all that stuff sort of came through, and I'd see an issue with it then. I don't see an issue with it now. Although, I mean, I know that you guys have discussed this in the context of teacher certification, which provides a little bit different slant on it, because there are the tests you have to take to be certified, and how do you make sure that they get the right content for that? So I get that argument as well. But I think you're right about that shift. And so what we have tried to do is we have tried to delay the implementation of these until a year to a year and a half later. And there is at least one other circumstance that I have entertained the idea of sort of a transition period, and we could certainly take that into consideration, because I wouldn't want this to be as smooth as possible. But on the other hand, I mean, I'm thinking about the Texas history thing. There are instances where you can have something at a lower division level, and you could have the same course sort of in much more depth or something at an upper division level. And I think for the field of study, the crucial issue is what really belongs at that lower division level to be successful there. And I could see the conversation going either way, in that some things that we think are lower division now may wind up being upper division, and some things that we think of as being upper division may wind up being lower division. I don't have any preconceived notion about where that should wind up. That really is a decision that the experts in those disciplines really need to talk about and kind of settle among themselves about where that really needs to be. But I could also see, I mean, I think one of the, and this is kind of an aside to all that, but I think there's at least a bit of an analogy here to, you know, to dual credit, where, you know, students have taken American government in high school. I did. Or, I mean, I sat in the class anyway, all right, and fell in love with a teacher. So maybe that's where my political science origins. I mean, maybe that's why I got interested in political science in the first place, is because I was in love with the teacher, you know, whose name happened to be, her last name happened to be Nations, for all the weird things in the world that happened. But anyway, but, you know, I took American government in high school, I took American government again in college. And then I took several forms of American government after that as a major, and then on in a master's and degree, and so forth. And you know, and at every level there was supposed to be more depth. And you know, one of the things that worries me about, I have some concerns about dual credit sometimes, is that if you're doing it all at one time, then you're not getting that next level of depth. And you see that in literature too. You know, where you take that in high school, you take it, sometimes you take again. Now, you may not read the same authors, but you take literature again in college, and the idea is that there's supposed to be some depth added to that you didn't have here. There's supposed to be some progression there. And sometimes you wind up sort of repeating at an upper division level what you sort of had at a lower division level, but at much better depth, or the requirements itself may change. You know, so I think there's room to sort of talk about those things and decide whether it needs to be at one level or another, or it needs to be at both. And that's a decision the disciplines need to really think about. And I mean, that's something you guys need to decide. I don't know what the answer to that is for Texas history.
Any questions,
anything
clarifications for Rex?
Thank you very much for coming down and
Thank you.
talking with us. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. I hope that was helpful.
It was.
Thanks.
Thank you. So where did we leave off? We tabled the Texas, or?
I'm wondering about this. It being 11:30, and I don't want us to be ruled by the clock, but we have, I think, in some ways, Dr. Peoples kind of brought some of things kind of full circle for us, and maybe it might be appropriate to come to some conclusion on Texas history before we move on. If for no other reason, then we'll have we've gotten something done this morning, right? We could go to lunch with a clear conscience, yeah. So I will tell you, just as a fun thing, I was looking at the minutes I was reviewing the minutes from the November meeting, and it looked like I never shut up. Blosser motion, blosser motion, blosser motion. Well, the explanation for that is oftentimes I will make a motion to get something on the table, to just get it out there. And if it's not necessarily that I'm wedded to it, it's just put it out on the table and see what you, that's why they're kind of competing motions in those minutes. And so I would motion that we, I would motion to accept Texas history. Now, let's be very clear on this. To accept Texas history where it is recommended in teacher certification track B, to accept the addition of Texas history. Essentially, what I would be doing is I would be adding Texas history to our previously accepted teacher track A. So I would make teacher track A now 15 hours because I'm bringing in Texas history. To be very clear, this is only affecting students who are in history certification 7 through 12, which is a small subset of people, and it's being done with two things in mind. One, that I make this motion fully cognizant of the fact that there are institutions that teach this at the upper division level and will have troubles with this, and that there are transferability issues. I get that. I also recognize that our task is to provide a baseline of preparation, and 20% of the test that these people will be taking comes from Texas history. So with those two considerations in mind, I move that we accept Texas history to our accepted teacher track A, adding 3 hours to make it 15 hours. Is there a second for that motion? Okay. Now, I think now that we have a motion on the table, we've been discussing this all morning, but is there discussion? Yes, please.
I just wanted to be clear. It's like it is a sticky situation because we don't want to. If we add this, we don't want to make universities feel compelled, right? That they have to bump it down. But at the same time, what Mr. Peoples was saying was that this is the baseline, and for our students who are doing that teacher certification, I mean, a sophomore level survey, is an equivalent baseline to the sophomore level survey or the sophomore level survey for world history and the freshman for US. So, I mean, and I know it will cause transfer issues, but I do think like that is you can still have the more specialized upper level Texas history courses, and they should, and I would encourage students to take those. But for, this small subset of student populations, I think what he made sense, like it's the baseline preparation, the baseline survey. So I agree, I concur.
Something that I would also add, which gets to the heart of what Barbara was speaking to earlier about the importance of, and what Rex talked about, the fact that we are a small subset of a much larger body of people across the state. We heard from a lot of those people this summer in the open comments to our decisions, and the single most talked about issue over and over and over again in those comments was the desire to add Texas history, not to the academic track, but specifically to the teacher certification track. That's what people said. Now, I don't think we should do it because they said it, but I am glad that we've come back to talk about that and make some kind of decision on it. Barbara.
I think we should do it, if only because of the public interest in the topic. I think that understanding that it's required any number of ways, and so would still be required of most of our students, whether we add it to these lists or not, is all true, and yet the prospect of removing it from a required field of study strikes me as damaging to what the public thinks of our institutions and what they accomplish. And for that reason alone, I'm for it. Though I do understand the issues of universities that use it for different purposes. I think that those adjustments can be made. I don't want to be the person who takes Texas history off the teaching track of students, of teacher students, normal school students in Texas.
So I'll be the person who opposes it then. and for this reason, I think it's bad for students. I think students who are attending a community college or junior college will perhaps look at this and go, okay, well, I can take that and then it will count. And the whole idea, as I understand, of this initiative is to smooth out those rocky roads of the transition from the 2-year to the 4-year institution. Students at our institution would, if they took this, would come to us and be told, we require 6 hours at the 3,000 level in Texas history for the major in history. And so they would essentially lose an elective because that's where this would need to be slotted, and they would need to repeat course content. And so I think for that reason it would be, I can only speak for my students, it would be bad for them to see this because it would be confusing. So, thank you.
When we're looking at this discussion, are you looking at those who are majoring in history or those who are teacher certification? Because we're only talking about changing the teacher certification, right?
Yes.
So they may not necessarily need to take the gazillion history classes that I love, but they may not be signing up for them.
For us, it's both. If you are pursuing teacher certification, you earn a BA in history. And so you have to take and we have some additional hours that are required for students pursuing teacher certification. That's a different track than just a straight BA in history. But regardless, our majors have to take, our majors who are pursuing teacher certification have to take Texas history. And we have it as a 2-course sequence at the 3,000 level. And so our students would be confused, and they would end up taking a class that they would then need to retake. And so for that reason, I think it's a bad idea to guide students to take classes at the community college level that then don't cleanly transfer to some institutions. And I don't think our institution would be the only one where this would be a problem.
But isn't it?
It's not at all because I oppose Texas history. I taught Texas history. I love it. I think it should be taught. It's a great class. I'm not saying a 2,000 level class is not as good as a 3,000 level class. I'm just saying it would confuse our students, and that's what I really think would be a problem.
Okay, thank you.
And my question is, isn't there a way, though, given Rex's comments, for that sequence to be adjusted to become more specialized in Texas history? So wouldn't you agree that there is room to make the adjustment within the next year or two or whatever time period?
And if it were up to me, I would probably work at that, but I don't teach Texas history at our institution, and the Texas historians who do would not agree to say, we're going to change this to a one course and 2,000 level. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What are you?
Well, so you're saying it's a two-course sequence at the 3,000 level? So why not teach, for instance, instead of just Texas? Well, no, I was going to say Texas history in the 20th century or Texas history during World War II, so that two-sequence Texas history is specialized, and so that leaves room for the Texas history at the 2,000 level. I feel like, at least when I taught at Texas A&M up till 3 years ago, I don't know, trying to think who teaches it, Felipe, Armando, that they wouldn't be that opposed to it, so.
So would that involve creating new courses in Texas history that are more focused on particular time periods or something?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Walter Binger, for instance, at Texas A&M, if I'm correct, he teaches a specialized Texas history at the 3,000 level, and I remember the process of adding new courses. I mean, you do all the paperwork, but usually within a year, you can set the class up.
So it would be similar to U.S. history, where you have like the one survey, but then you have the upper level are all like more specialized by time period or theme or people group.
You have a comment? Oh, okay.
I am very appreciative of all the views that have been expressed, but I think it's time to call the question. So therefore, I call the question. All in favor of proceeding to a vote on the motion signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed and wish to continue debate signify by saying nay. Abstentions? Nay. Not for continuing debate. Oh. No, we haven't voted. All we're doing, clarification, all we're doing is proceeding to vote. We're just cutting off debate. I hate to do this, but I think we're all ready to vote. Yeah, lunch is over there. So no sandwiches until we vote. So it's important to now that we've cut debate, just to clarify, the motion is to move to include Texas history in our teacher certification Track A. Essentially, I'm using Track A as ours, and I'm moving what they did over to our column. So we're moving Texas history into our column. Our column now becomes a 15 credit hour field of study, specifically for those in history 7 through 12 certification. Any questions about the motion? All in favor of the motion on the table signify by saying aye, or actually raise your hands for vote purposes. 1, 2, 3. I count 8.
For those in the booth, that's 8 in favor, aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay or raising your hand so we can count you. 1, 2, 3, 4. I count 4 opposed and abstentions to the motion. No abstentions to the motion. The motion carries. Thank you for a rigorous debate. That's not an easy decision. I am personally very thankful that everything we're doing today will be revised and looked at in a couple of years. So we're not making massive decisions for the future of the world.
And it goes out for another 30-day public comment period.
That's
so
right.
we will hear back on all this again. And you heard Rex say if there are substantive and several public comments, then it's not impossible that we'll come back and eat some more sandwiches together.
So just a point of clarification, when it goes out again, is it possible to put some in bold, like size 25 font, the committee took into consideration the previous comments? So that we have addressed your comments by including it. In light of what we've
comments we resolved and voted on.
Yes. So, now, one other small bit of business that I think we can do very quickly, and it kind of helps us, feel like we're on the same page. I do feel that we need to reaffirm our commitment to including world civilization, both 1 and 2. That's something that they chose. It's something we chose. But I do think we need to reaffirm that. So looking at our teacher track A, the middle column that we're working from, I make a motion that we reaffirm our commitment to including World Civ 1 and World Civ 2 in the teacher certification track for students who are in history 7 through 12 certification as required courses, part of the now 15-hour teacher certification field of study. Is there a second? Any discussion or debate? Are you ready to vote? If you're ready to vote, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
If you're not ready to vote? Okay, the question has been called. All in favor of reaffirming our commitment to World Civ 1 and 2 in the field of study for teacher certification 7 through 12, signify by raising your hand saying aye.
Aye.
1, 2,
All but one.
all but one. And those opposed? All but one. So one, is opposition or abstention? Opposition. Fine, opposition. Well, do you want to address, or do you have any comments or concerns?
The request from folks at UT Dallas was, we don't feel we have any historians trained to offer a survey in world history. However, we have historians who have specialty in various areas of world history, and so the wish was to replace a world history course with optional local area surveys in, for example, Latin American history, East Asian history, African and Middle Eastern history. Well,
I completely commiserate with that. I understand that. I think, unfortunately, our remit is only to include courses in the ACGM. And so while that is, and now we could exercise our full authority and call for courses to the ACGM, but I would prefer not to do that at this point, just because I don't feel like I have the expertise to bring forward those types of courses. But I do understand that concern. Thank you.
You bet.
And if it makes you feel any better, at the community college, our World Civ teachers often have to learn as the semester goes. So sorry, it sounds like maybe the university professors are going to have to do the same. Sorry. Right. Yeah.
I'm teaching small engine repair. No, I'm teaching. In 2 weeks. I don't. No, I'm teasing. On that note, now before we get to lunch, I just want to draw our attention to what our task is after lunch, not to cause indigestion, but what we're going to be doing after lunch is we're going to be tackling the final, well, it's the final major problem we have, and that's the question of or. If you look at our center track, which we're working from, Track A and Track B, the major difference, we both agree United States history, but the wonderful teacher cert folks, by one vote, very close vote, by one vote, added the option to include Mexican American history. And we're going to be talking about whether we want to include that option in this track or not. And that'll be our major task right after lunch. Any comments or questions or concerns before we break for lunch? Isn't it great to feel like you've done something? I mean, this is good. Well, having accomplished things, well, I hope there's chocolate over there. That'll take care of everything. It is 11:45. What time should we come back?
Well, why don't we come back at 12:15, if that's all right. So for those in the booth, we'll stand adjourned until 12:15, and if we need a little extra time, then we'll take it, but we'll aim for that.
Thank you all for your comments and discussion so far.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our conversation now turns to, if we look at teacher track certification, our teacher certification track B, the one proposed in November, and track A, the one we proposed in March, there's that or between them. We need to talk about that, whether we wish to accept their recommendation to include Mexican American history as an option in the teacher certification track. What we thought we would do before we get into the conversation is I thought I would draw your attention to how we came to this decision in the November meeting. It's on page 5 of those minutes, and you may not have the minutes in front of you, so I thought I might just ask your indulgence. I might read just briefly, because some of the, actually quite a few of the issues that were brought up in that conversation in November will probably animate our conversation this afternoon. If you notice on page 5, it will, most of the paragraphs begin, Blosser made a motion to. Now, the reason I was doing that was because what we were doing in that particular part of the meeting, if you go back to page 4, I'm making motions on everything that was addressed in public comments. This is what I'll do later. I'll just make the motion on the public comments so that we can discuss it. So I was making a motion on the public comment. One of the public comments was to include Mexican American history in the teacher certification track. So bottom of page 5, Blosser made a motion to create a history teaching track that includes, I'm sorry, even further down. Here we go. Blosser made a motion to include Mexican American history in the teaching track field of study. Etienne Gray, a member of the committee, asked if students could be given an option of taking Texas history or Mexican American history. Facaril, another member, responded that teachers will have to teach U.S. history and students choose to take Mexican American history instead. They will be teaching things in which they have never had coursework. Morgan said that Mexican American history is U.S. history. Etienne Gray agreed, but said that the course does not include much colonial history. The English colonial experience, Puritans, and the American Revolution. Cox replied that those subjects are covered in the first Mexican-American history course. McKissick asked if these courses are reflective of the categories on the certification exam. Could a student pass the test in U.S. history by taking Mexican-American history? McCormick replied that there is some overlap between U.S. and Mexican-American history, and that Mexican-American history is a popular class, especially in the Valley region. Brower added that students have to take upper division courses in U.S. history, and the Mexican-American history course promotes understanding of multiple perspectives. Sandul said that the U.S. history should be required because of the and students are not precluded from taking Mexican-American, African-American, Native American, or other history courses. And then the final paragraph here, Blosser made a motion to amend the field of study to include U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, Mexican-American History 1, or Mexican-American History 2 courses. Students would have to choose one early class, U.S. or Mexican-American History, and one later class, U.S. or Mexican-American History 2. The motion carried. That motion carried, it's not reflected in the minutes, but carried by one vote. That's the background. That's how we have this or here. Some of the debates that we had, that I read to you, dealt with the fact that there was some concern in the room that Mexican-American history might not fully prepare a student for the test. That was one of the major concerns that we had. Another concern I think that we could talk about is, we talk about many other things too, but the fact that right now, teacher certification track B is very different than our academic field of study. The academic field of study has U.S. history as a requirement. There's no or there. There is an or here. If we want to talk about parity, we can talk about maybe adding an or taking out an or, those types of things. Having just scratched the surface of kind of introducing the topic and how it came to be, I want to turn it over to my colleague to talk more about the place of Mexican-American history in the proposed teacher track.
So I was asked by, I believe it was a member of the teacher certification subcommittee from Stephen of Austin. He sent us an email after that meeting saying that he was concerned that someone taking history 2327, 2328 would not be able to do well on the history 7 through 12 certification exams. So I went and I printed the prep manual online, and I went through every single domain and competency. So for those who haven't seen it, this test is divided into domains and then further subdivided into competencies. And I wanted to assuage his concerns that someone who takes my Mexican American History 1 or 2 would not do well on this exam. But as I went through all these competencies, so much of what they're being tested on for History 7 through 12 is what I cover. There's a lot of material here. Competency 3 on the Inca, Aztec, Maya, Atlantic slave trade, Columbian exchange, conquest of the Aztec, Latin American wars of independence, decolonization, westward expansion, Spanish-American War, progressive era, that I do cover in Mexican American history, and that's just a sample. And I feel more confident now than I did then at that meeting in November when I hadn't looked at this exam, saying that a student taking my Mexican American History 1 or 2, and the argument I made, we talked about this beforehand, is that that student, after they take those 2,000 level courses and transfers, is going to take other U.S. history courses. It's going to take, I don't remember how many additional U.S. history courses are required, but they're going to take U.S. history during, I don't know, progressive era, U.S. history, civil rights movements, et cetera, et cetera. So my Mexican American History 1 and 2 can't be expected to cover everything that's going to be on the exam, because other courses that are taken later on as the student pursues this History 7 through 12 degree are going to cover those areas like the American Revolution, which, okay, that's one I will concede in Mexican American history. I, may talk about it, but I'm not going to go into depth the way the exam covers. So that's why I'm here to say that I think adding the or not adding, keeping the or in the teacher certification Track B is something we should adopt for the plan we came up with. And I did reach out to other professors who teach Mexican American history, and I just wanted to pass out a letter. We don't have to go into depth, but just to honor the work they did, where they discuss why they think it's important that this course be accepted in the teacher certification. It's signed by several people, although granted there are people here from Kansas and private universities who this would apply to that signed it, but I just wanted to give you some other additional information, some food for thought. So I'll let other people add their comments or disagreements. I'm open to hear it all, but I really wanted to put that out there, that the courses that I teach, having gone through this prep manual very carefully, are a good foundation, and they're not going to be the only class, just to emphasize that. My classes are not going to be the only history classes a student takes. So
I want to before we gauge your comments, I want to thank my colleague, I want to thank Lisa for her preparation, for looking into this. This is an area where I think we can be completely open about. This is an area where Lisa and I have a difference of opinion. I'm of the opinion that I believe the or should be removed. She would like to retain the or. We've had long conversations about this. They're amicable conversations. We've both, I can see the value in her view. I think she can see the value in my view. None of this is, none in my view, is in no way, shape, or form derogatory in any way to the value or importance of Mexican American history. It is a very important story. In fact, I agree 110% with the comment made in our previous meeting that Mexican American history is American history. I agree entirely with that. My concern is that the field of study is to provide, especially in teacher certification, is to provide a baseline of knowledge that equips them to essentially to take a test. Does it prepare them entirely for the test? No, but it provides the baseline from which additional knowledge is gathered to take a test. And while I agree with my colleague entirely that many areas of the test, and I have copies as well, gone through them, many areas of the test are covered in both Mexican American history and U.S. history, there are very noticeable gaps. And the gaps are, as my colleague mentioned, most aware to me in colonial American history. Now, I'm a colonial Americanist, so I of course feel these more perhaps more than others. But I do see that there are gaps in the early portions of American history. Now, are there other areas where there is parity? Absolutely, especially in those areas leading up to and after 1848. I think we all agree that there's great parity, but there are significant gaps in the early period. And if we look at the domains here, just to give you, for an example, some of the things that are asked about here, that the students will be required to know for a test, demonstrates knowledge of individuals, events, and issues shaped with the development of colonial society, including interactions among Europeans, Africans, and American Indians. I would concede that is likely offered in Mexican-American history. But further down, demonstrates knowledge of the foundations of representative government in the United States, e.g., ways in which the Mayflower Compact, the Iroquois Confederacy, the fundamental orders of Connecticut, and the Virginia House of Burgesses contributed to the growth of representative government. We all know the value that the Texas place, I'm not talking about the state, but these teaks and techs and things, places on the development of representative government. We know we know what they're looking for, and I think these are fairly important things that they want to see. Those, to my knowledge, are not covered or covered with the same level in a Mexican-American history course as they would be in a survey course on American history. And there are other things as well that are not covered in the, as you mentioned, the American Revolution, mercantilism, British policies.
Definitely cover that, yeah.
Well, British policies following the French and Indian War, and Lexington Concord, and so on and so forth. And so I think, it is my view, that because we are to provide a baseline, we should require that the baseline cover as many of the areas covered under the test as possible, as fulsomely as possible. And while I know there are gaps in the way the U.S. History Survey is taught from one institution to the other, from one instructor to the other, I have the perhaps naive belief that there are fewer gaps between what teachers are required to know on a test and the U.S. History Survey than there are between what teachers are to know for the test and a Mexican-American History Survey. Finally, one other point I wanted to bring up is we are dealing with a very small group of individuals. My colleague mentioned this morning. Lisa talked about this morning. It's a very small group. I did some math. The number of students affected by the U.S. History Survey, number of students taking the U.S. History Survey in fiscal year 16 is 330,852.
Wait a minute, say that again, just so I can...
The number of students taking U.S. History 1 or U.S. History 2 in fiscal year 16 is 330,852. And some of you may feel like you taught almost all of them. But 330,852, I feel like I know every one of those kids. And across 157 institutions. Now, I'm not one to say just because large numbers of people do something that it's necessarily right. But this affects a whole bunch of people. And therefore, I think it is right and proper that it be included in a track. It's an important, it also counts for the course, so we can double dip, as does Mexican-American history. The number of students enrolled in a Mexican-American history course in fiscal year 16 is 1,300.
And it's growing, I'll add.
And I don't doubt that, but 1,300 across 36 institutions. What we are doing here is we are not only saying that U.S. history and Mexican-American history will adequately provide a baseline for the test, we are also the question that came up in the meeting then is, if we're going to include Mexican-American history, wouldn't we also need to include African-American history? Because that is also interchangeable within the core, and it's also in the ACGM.
Is it interchangeable with the core, Ellen?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that raises another question. Do we have more selection here than that? My thought is that Mexican-American history is very valuable and very important and is best served as being emphasized in the academic field of study as one of the choices where we've provided it. And students will undeniably take it there, and enrollments will continue to increase, and that's not, it's still, there's still a place for it. Indeed, there's a place for it in a field of study, academic field of study, that affects more students than in the teacher certification track, which will affect fewer students, as we've already said. So for all of those reasons, I am in favor of removing the or and retaining our previous use of U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2 in our teacher certification track. And I'll be quiet now and get your comments.
Could I just add a few things? I'm sorry, because I just wanted to respond to some of the things that Jacob brought up, and then I promise I'll get to your point. So I hear what you're saying about Mexican-American history not covering as many topics on the certification test as U.S. history, but I would argue the competencies on this History 7 through 12 exam that cover world history, you see Mexican-American history covering Incas, Aztecs, and Mayas. So whereas U.S. history is covering more of the U.S. history topics, Mexican-American history covers a lot of the topics in the Texas history and the world history, and some, not as much, but some in the U.S. history. So I would argue that Mexican-American history actually helps students prepare in terms of breadth, whereas the U.S. history helps them, I guess you could argue, prepare in terms of depth. But I think that these courses, Mexican-American History 1 and 2, are still valuable. If we just narrow it down and say preparation for U.S. history, I can't argue with that. It's not going to prepare students as much. But in terms of the whole test, I would say it's just as good. And one thing I'm not sure if you all are familiar with is the State Board of Education recently passed I'm not sure what to call it, law or resolution saying that Mexican-American history can now be offered at the high schools. So the reason I said more earlier when Jacob made his comment is that there are going to be, in the next several years, students who are going to want to become a history major because they really want to teach the Mexican-American history class. So by having that or, we're basically saying, so for those few who really are getting this history degree to become a Mexican-American history teacher, that or kind of says we supported state law, says it's okay. So I really wanted to put it out there because there was a lot of work done over the past month or two to make sure we get Mexican-American history 1 or 2 included in as many areas as possible, because if we don't make it something that has weight behind it, that is recognized as being valuable in different degree plans, it's not going to grow. So just wanted to add that, sorry.
That's okay. First, let me thank you for this letter. It's nice to see at least 4 of these people were once my students, so that's good to see. I want to propose maybe a third option, which is that maybe the 1301 become the required one for the first half. I teach a lot of the second half, and I do see a lot of overlap with the Mexican-American studies at that level. So maybe it's possible to do 1301 as the requirement for the first half, but then in 1302 offer either Mexican-American or U.S.
So
And maybe that's an option
Keep the or for the
second half.
1302-23.
Right.
That's interesting. If I had to choose which one to put it in, I would say the or should be for the first one.
Really?
But-
How come? I'm
Well,
curious.
because if you want to look at the prep manual, if anyone wants to look at the
I've seen it, so-
competencies, it seemed to me that there was
Because of the
even
world
more
study
overlap.
element?
Because of the world history and Aztec Mayas and all the rest.
Oh, you want to speak?
So if anyone wants to see. Sorry?
Yeah.
You're taking world
Yeah.
civics, they're going to get that, right?
But yeah, it wasn't just that. It was also, well, I guess I was going to say Cortez and all that other stuff.
And I do that in my 1301. Maybe I'm just the only one, but I do Aztecs and, yeah.
I think we're all in the midst of a shift in perspective. Colonial is the word I'm having trouble with, right? Revolution, colonial. We're saying English colonial. We're seeing American history as moving from the east to the west, and it's quite possible to see it and to teach it as moving from the south into the north.
Exactly.
And that's the way I teach it when I teach U.S. history, and they object. But I was taught by, my advisor thinks American history more globally, and so I have the conceit that I do too.
And even if we just consider the indigenous perspective, it's not west or south, it's like we were already here, so we had to deal with the consequences of colonization. Yeah.
Exactly right. And so I think the question is, how far down the path are we of integration of these, and what are the proportions that we're trying to offer to our students? And I'm not sure where I come because of the way I teach it. I certainly see things like mercantilism. I also think that the English and the French perspective, not for us, but if you're teaching New England as a crucial part, then the competition among empires is one of the most important things for them to understand, instead of the old sort of Perry Miller, you know, which I love. I can quote right here, but it's not where we're at in the discipline. This was more contemplative than anything else.
So I actually have training as both a U.S. and a world historian. And so this global shift towards in American history is long overdue, very welcome. However, while the field of academics is going there, the state exam is still very, very heavily Eurocentric, Anglocentric when it comes to colonialism. And so the thing is that if we make this change to go, okay, you know, we really want to emphasize, you know, the history of other groups of people that have traditionally been ignored by the narrative. That's great, but the test is still very heavily traditional. So we need to balance, yes, we want to move the field forward collectively. We want this new global approach, this more inclusive approach, to eventually make its way onto the test and be standard. And a lot of our teachers will do more inclusive, but the test is still not as inclusive. And so we want to be careful to make sure that we're not having them flunk the test, so to speak, and yeah, put the cart in front of the horse. So I think that's my hesitancy with keeping the or, is that especially for the colonial era in which colonial reads, like you were mentioning earlier, right? Like colonial reads, we're talking about the original 13 British colonies. That's the focus of most of American history, is still what has happened in this narrow strip. And yes, we have more teachers, like I also teach and, you know, try to teach inclusively, like what's going on in, like, I bring Hawaii in both 1301 and 1302 and, you know, Alaska and stuff like that, and try to be as global as possible, but it's still very heavily with the standards, very Eurocentric.
Let me, thank you, and I want to make sure I express myself perhaps a little clearer. I am not in any way advocating for a Eurocentric view of early American history. What I would say is I struggle so often between the requirements that we find here, which are Eurocentric in many ways, and my own desire to teach it in a much more multicultural and inclusive way. And I think that struggle is important, that there is value to be found in trying to integrate what is absolutely an older historiographic model that we find in the requirements here with the new emerging emphasis on the global south and on other parts of the world and how it relates to us. I think that my emphasis is not on, are the 13 colonies taught in a particular way in a particular course. My emphasis on which course provides an overview of American history more fulsomely, more complete, not complete, well, addresses these things in their entirety. And my thought is that if there are gaps in the way that it is taught, if there are gaps in what is taught and what is in here, I go back to what you said about we don't want to teach to a test, but then again, these students, and this is something that came up in our November meeting, then again, these students will be required to pass a test, and required to pass a test over information like the House of Burgesses. And so therefore, we better have a course that, at least to some degree, talks about those things.
And
Yeah.
so, oh, go ahead, you go ahead.
What I was going to say is that, you know, I think when we talk about, you know, changing the test, or that's something that's a movement that's going to have to come from education programs. That's not something that we can push. We would hope that, like, let's say we remove the or and we say U.S. history. Let's hope that most places still say let's recommend or let's definitively include. Like, for example, at UT El Paso, their history 7 through 12. Mexican American history is only offered as a one semester course that's junior level. And it is not required, it's recommended. for those who are taking the exam. So I really want to grow Mexican American history, but at the same time, like I feel like, especially like you said, the 23-27 is going to have the most gaps when it comes to the U.S. history competencies because of the emphasis on Anglo and Eastern history.
And I guess just in counter to that, the way I see it is I keep thinking of a very particular situation. I teach in San Antonio, 63% of the population is of Latino, Latinx descent, predominantly Mexican American. And I've had students come into Mexican American history, one or two, who had no idea of the impact their culture had on the U.S. and the struggles their families went through, and they suddenly, I shouldn't say suddenly, but they develop a desire to teach Mexican American history in the high school. So the way I'm looking at it is from the perspective of that student, knowing that there is, I think by 2020, going to be a Mexican American history class. This is just for that select population. So, I mean, I'm not naive. I know most advisors and most faculty are going to say, do the U.S. History 1 and 2 for that test. That's going to best prepare you. But for that once in a, I don't know, rare instance student who's going to say, I really want to do the Mexican American history, I think keeping the OR serves that particular population. So the way I see the OR is it's for that small population, creating a degree plan that lets that student know that they can start preparing to teach the Mexican American history and have this degree plan that supports it. Well, I'll stop there.
And there's not going to be any lack of upper division Mexican American history courses.
Yeah, that was my point, is like, it's the same. I see your point, though. You want the institutional, like, look, like the institution is supporting it.
Behind it.
But I mean, in the interest of making sure that they're prepared for the breadth of the test,
But
I mean, those students are going to take those upper division classes anyways.
Well, same thing with the upper division U.S. history. I mean, they're not going to stop and just take the 2 World Civ, the 23, I forget the course numbers, 2321, 2322, and 1301, 1302. They're going to take other upper division U.S. history. So to counter that, we can also make the argument that it's okay if they take the Mexican American history because they're going to later take the U.S. history focusing on the Great Depression, World War II.
Yeah, that's the thing, is the U.S. history is so fragmented when you look at the upper levels. Because if you look at, like I said, like UTEP has Mexican American history as a junior level, well, sort of like upper level survey. There's no equivalent of upper level survey at any school I've ever seen in American history. It's all like so hyper fragmented that they're not going to get that same level of the breadth that we need for the exam without 1301 and 1302.
And our goal with the field of study is to provide that baseline of knowledge across a variety of fields, across a variety of themes, that will then inspire them to take upper division courses in selected areas of interest. There's, I would hope that in my U.S. history course that, in fact, I know I have at some place or other, I have encouraged a student or inspired a student to say, oh, well, this, because I teach Mexican American history as a part of this survey. So when we come to a portion where we talk about Mexican American history and then they say, oh, well, I want to take Dr. Fanning's course on Mexican American history next semester, and that's an upper division course, and they do that. And that's what this field of study is supposed to be, this baseline that, yes, does prepare them for this blasted test, but also inspires them to go deeper in an upper division course in areas of thematic specialization. Yeah?
Actually, go ahead. He had his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just have a simple question.
I think mine is simple as well. Why not African American history? That's the question.
Wasn't that something that was brought up, and it had to do with, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan or Jake, what do you call it? It's the 80 core in many places, the social and behavioral sciences, and not the history core, and that was kind of the issue as to why we haven't put African American history in
And
there.
it's a one semester, there are 2 problems with it. One, it's 1 semester. It does not fit here in this 2-semester thing. That's one issue. The second issue is there's actually a problem in the ACGM description.
Yes, the description essentially describes that class could be any particular study. It's not specific enough, and so that was.
Race in America.
Yeah, it should be called. It was really similar to, was it sociology, or there was another class that was really, the title was better a fit to that description. Another class in the HCGM, I can't remember the name
Didn't
of
this
it.
committee recommend that the ACGM committee revise and
Yes, we
revisit
did.
the African American course?
We did.
We did in March, yeah.
So perhaps that might be best taken up in when this is reconsidered 5 years from now, when that new African American course has been defined and perhaps reestablished. This is a thought, but certainly you could fit it in. I mean, it is listed as one of the options in the academic track, right?
Yes.
So that
it's
didn't
really
stop you. It didn't stop us from including it in its imperfect form in the academic track.
It's a conceptual question Ben is asking, I suspect, though. A thematic specialization.
Yeah.
My question's simple,
Are you pointing to him or me?
which is, correct me if I'm wrong, which I very likely am, but Mexican American history can be substituted for one of the American histories, right? Anyway?
Both of them can be
Well,
substituted.
it can, but here's the tricky business, is where that's a core decision. And what it has taken me a long time to get my head around is the field of study is separate from the core. So it is a separate thing from the core. So they are interchangeable in the core. As is African American history for that matter.
Texas.
And Texas history. In neither of the two proposed teacher certification tracks would the full interchangeability of the core be present. So in teacher track A, which we adopted in March, it's just the one. Teacher track B would have an or there, but it would not have the full or of the core. So one question was raised in November is, what do you do with a student who's core complete because they took Mexican American history A and Mexican American history B, 1 and 2, and they did that for their core? Well, they would be required to take U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2 to be field of study complete. That affects, we decided in November, that affects a very small number of people, and that number can be brought down a lot more through very simple advising, right? But that may be a concern. There might be some students who would end up taking 4 semesters of introductory U.S. history. But again, I think we decided in November that wasn't a major concern because it's a small group. Yeah.
I have a quick question, but I have to apologize to Kenneth before I ask it, because we talked about it earlier, and he said, please don't bring this up. But anyway, but because I think Jacob brought it up, I'm going to go ahead and bring it up too. Would it be possible also to consider moving 2327 and 2328, the or option, to the academic field at this meeting?
They're already there.
But I mean, as an or in that
yes.
specific area.
So here is the answer to your question is yes. And here is the
Sorry.
here is the question. If you decide to retain the or, then the big question becomes, what about parity across these two fields? And if or is in one, then we should consider whether or should be in another. Likewise, where I'm at right now, or is in one but not in the other, I would prefer to see the or removed. Or we could go to your idea of kind of splitting it in two and having an or in one of those categories and not in the other. So there's lots of options. The answer to your question is this committee has not unlimited power, but it has a lot of power to revisit decisions that we've made before.
In that case, I'm really, really sorry, Kenneth.
But we can't say the whole thing is bogus and go home. But other than that, we can. What? We tried. What other comments or questions?
Has everyone had time to read the letter that Lisa distributed? Okay, I didn't want it to. Okay.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, oh, I'm sorry. You were going to make a point.
I'm of two minds. I still don't know how I'm going to vote, because I think in terms of general, large economic structures, I'm for a more global version. In terms of institutions of representative government, I think you have to make a case for particular colonies. I would, as an actor network theorist, I'd rather see the heft come down on the side of the teachers who are being prepared to teach Mexican-American history at the high school level. On the other hand, I'm of two minds.
Tricky question. It really is.
And I guess I thought about this a lot because I teach U.S. history 1 and 2. I've taught Texas history. I taught it for 7 years. And for the past 3 years, I've been mostly teaching Mexican-American history. So I've taught all these major courses we've been discussing. And Jay can support this. In November, I was pulling up the manual, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if Mexican-American history 1 or 2 will prepare a student to take this test. But 2 months later, I've had more of a chance to sit down and look through this. And again, if anyone wants to look through it, I highlighted the areas where Mexican-American history addresses points in this test. And I feel more confident saying that Mexican-American history 1 or 2 is good preparation. And I know that maybe the student won't take Revolutionary War in the U.S., so granted, that's true if the upper division U.S. history classes they take don't cover that, and that's on the exam, the student's going to have a hard time. But one of the things I was discussing with the other professors who teach Mexican-American history or who signed this letter is that the way I see this test, and I have not taken it, but just having looked at it and talked to 2 or 3 teachers, high school teachers who've taken it, it seems to me, so this is just opinion, but hopefully you will see that I think it's informed opinion having looked at this exam and everything, but the tests, the teacher certification test, history 7 through 12, seems it's almost like a law school student takes their law school classes and then spends months, maybe a few or several, getting ready for the tests, buying the manual, taking a course, and preparing on their own. And so that's another reason, in addition to the others that I already offered, why I think that the student on their own is going to have to study. Because the teachers I talk to who teach Mexican-American literature, one at the high school, Andres, and then Araceli, who teaches Mexican-American studies in the middle school level, they said, yeah, I took a lot of literature classes or history, whatever, but on my own, I still had to go back and review because these questions are very, very specific that you're not going to remember 2 or 3 years later about Virginia, how much territory it covers. So that's the last point I'm going to make.
I think it's a very good point. I would say that one of the things that is very tricky, and this comes down to my home institution, is that the level of emphasis, level of importance placed on this test is huge. And institutions who produce graduates who do not pass this test can run the risk of losing their certification, their ability to certify. And therefore, if we talk about a baseline level of knowledge and preparation that we are going to provide in a field of study, we need to make sure that baseline covers as many, forgive this double thing, it covers as many bases as possible that are covered in this test. I have never in my life advocated for teaching to or for a test. This is inimical to who I am as an academic, but it also resonates with a very key part of my character, which is pragmatism. And for me, if we are going to make students take a test, and if we are going to make them have a certain baseline of knowledge, which we both are, we're going to make them, if they're teacher cert, we're going to make them take this test, and we're also going to make them do a teacher certification track in a field of study, then those two should be as closely knit as possible. I do not disagree that there are overlap in many areas, but I also know that there are considerable gaps. And I would prefer that those gaps be addressed in the baseline area, the first individual, in the field of study, rather than leave those gaps to be addressed to upper division classes in specialized areas that they may or may not take. You can see we both feel very passionate about our respective positions, and we have decided that however this comes down, we will remain friends.
Yes.
And And really, in many ways, one of the things that I'll make you privy to this is we are not speaking just for ourselves, but we're also speaking in great fear of the people back home we have to go back to and explain this to either way. And so we have to fight so vociferously for our positions for fear of imminent execution when we go back home. Now, we've talked an awful lot. Are there other comments or thoughts, or are you ready to? Yes, please.
I don't know if I'm alone in this, but once upon a time I thought I was going to be a high school teacher myself. And this is done in another state, but it sounds very similar to what we're talking about right now. The requirements that history majors / education majors were to take, they ran across the gamut. And one thing that stands out in my mind was we had to do something other than European, other than U.S. for a better perspective. I want to say that I think that both sides, if you will, of this argument make very good cases, and, I bounce back and forth when it comes to how I'd like to vote. But from the perspective of someone who actually did take this test, granted several years ago, I don't necessarily think that there is a foolproof way of doing it. I think that it comes down to, what you get over here, you give up a little bit over there. And what you get over there, you give up a little bit over here. And so I guess what this is going to come down to from someone like me would be, how do we do this most efficiently in continuing to make sure that we're preparing our students for the exam, for good, better, or worse, that they're going to have to take.
I don't want to rush anybody.
I said my piece.
And I, for once in my life, I'm speechless. I have nothing to say. So I will respectfully call the question. If you want to continue conversation, by all means, we just vote no. But all in favor of calling this question and proceeding to a vote, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We will proceed to vote. I think the motion that I would bring probably the cleanest way to do this motion, and I will completely defer to you, but the cleanest way to do the motion would be just simply to, I motion that we keep the track the same, that we have teacher track A. We just include U.S. History 1 and 2. And here I'm not talking about the world civs or the Texas history. Those are already decided. So just in the top here of teaching track A, the motion is to require students in teacher certification track for 7 through 12 history to take U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2. That is the motion. The motion would limit it to U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2. The motion does not include the option of Mexican American history. I think that's just the cleanest way to word it. So this is just, the motion is just U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2, not to include Mexican American history. Is that okay to word it that way?
Yeah, just to keep it
Keep it the way
we
it
had
was.
originally in March.
The way we originally had it in March.
Planned it.
The moment has come. All in favor of the motion to retain U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2 exclusively, without the option of Mexican American History 1 or Mexican American History 2, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Thank you. Those opposed to the motion, who would like to include Mexican American History 1 or 2? 1, 2, 3. Abstentions? 1, 2. Thank you very much. Thank you. This is very, I knew this was going to be a difficult decision. I can see merit in both areas. So the motion carries, and right now we have a teacher certification track that includes U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, World Civ 1, World Civ 2, and Texas history. there are two other pieces of business, one a bit more controversial than the other. So let's go for the controversy, shall we? The other topic of consideration, talking about parity across these programs. If you'll note our current teacher cert, we require World Civ 1 and World Civ 2. This is largely in response to it was our decision in March. It was ratified again this morning. It was also the decision of the folks in November, largely in response to the requirements of the test. When we met in March, we said we don't want them to have Western Civ, we want them to have World Civ, and that passed by a large majority in March. If you look over to the academic field of study, we give them a choice. We say you can take Western Civ 1 or 2, you can take World Civ 1 or 2. I have no problem leaving that the way it is, but I think it should be considered by this body, at least for discussion purposes, because we could absolutely have the ability to strike Western Civ 1 or 2 from those lists of courses in the academic track and funnel everybody into World Civ. We could do that. That trend has already happened across the state. The number of people taking Western Civ is down. The number of people taking World Civ is up. There still are roughly 4,000 students in fiscal year 16 who took Western Civ 1 and 2 in a smaller number of institutions than those who took World Civ. I can give you those numbers.
Roughly 6,372 who are doing World Civ 1 and or 2.
So it's not a huge difference. One of our colleagues wrote in a memo that until this is decided, until this issue is decided between Western Civ and World Civ, it's kind of hard to decide. My response to that is, who's going to decide it? It would seem to me that this body is in a unique position where we could put our thumb on the scale and say we would prefer students to have World Civ over Western Civ, and we would prefer them to have it for all of the reasons we just mentioned a moment ago about Mexican American history. Global breadth, inclusion, multiculturalism, diversity, all of these reasons. And so I propose for discussion the possibility that we remove Western Civ from the academic field of study. And we say in the academic field of study they're choosing two. So we're saying you can choose two. You can choose Texas history. You could choose World Civ 1 or 2, Mexican American history 1 or 2, or African American history, but not Western Civ. Someone, I see a hand.
I wanted to say I believe there are institutions.
I guess I'm in favor of a view of the field that privileges World Civ over Western Civ, but I guess I just don't feel inclined to use this body's coercive power to force other institutions to do that.
I was going to say, we actually, after a long lapse, added Western Civ back into our course catalog. However, we don't call it Western Civ, we call it European history, which is what it actually is.
Should be called. Thank you.
I mean, you talked about the Middle East, you talked about...
That is not appropriate. I will argue as a world historian, Egypt is not Western. I will argue a lot of stuff included in Western Civ is not actually Western. It is Western, modern European culture co-opting the things they thought were cool about other non-Western cultures. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like, if you whack it, like I understand the impulse, right, to just go, I understand the impulse. However, I feel like that also undercuts the possibility of institutions like mine who have taken it and like, it's still, a lot of the course objectives don't shift if you put it to European rather than Western. So then that removes the option for our students to take that.
I would also argue that
as the European history survey.
that the intersection of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism that you cover in Western Civ is important in a modern context.
But you also cover that in world.
Not in the same depth.
I do.
I teach both of those, and you don't do it in the same depth.
I would argue that Islam is one of the things significantly missing from Western Civ,
Yes.
as the preservation of Rome's knowledge during the Dark Ages, the Persian Behold proofs. This is the kind of thing that Western Civ and the linear model that Western Civ presents, in my experience, leaves out. Not deliberately, just by tracing a line. Yeah, but perhaps in its formation as opposed to the agendas of the people teaching it now.
I agree with that. Formation as opposed to the people teaching it. I teach it.
Bearing the marks of origins is one of the things we study.
In the last motion, I clearly had an agenda. We all had agendas. In this motion, I bring this up only for conversation purposes because I think it's important that we leave the conversation. Sensing the mood of the room, would it be, well, I'm going to, Blosser proposes a motion. Blosser proposes the following motion, that we affirm the academic field of study as passed in March in toto without amendment. But we just accept it. Yeah.
I think this leaves out Melissa's question of students who are now taking a course called European History. Yes?
Well, if we struck it, if we remove, well, what he's saying now is to leave it alone.
Leave it alone.
And so what I'm saying is, like, if we leave it alone, then my students who are taking History 2311, but we call it European History, still get credit for it. But if we remove it, then they don't.
Oh, okay. They still get it because it's the same number.
It's the same number.
Yeah.
Not in the ACGM as Europe.
If we leave it alone, you're fine. Your
Yes.
kids are fine. Okay. So I propose that we just reaffirm our academic track from March without any change or amendment. Because the only, and perhaps others could think of amendment, the only amendment I could think of was parity between the two,
Yeah.
World Civ here, Western Civ here. But so,
I just have one question before we do this. So does the Western Civ 1 and 2 count only towards the, I don't know if you all know this, count only towards the history core? Can it count towards the language, philosophy, and culture core?
In a lot of
It depends on the institution,
So
yes.
if we whack it, it could still count towards the core, like, there's still a reason for
Yes.
students to take it?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's an important point
Yeah.
to consider.
It depends on the institution. Like, so for example, at my institution, we've just added it back into the catalog, but it's as a history option. It is not in the core. World history is in the core, but this class is not. Unless we move to revise the core and add it at a future point, but I don't see much traction for that.
Okay, thank you.
so ready to call the question on reaffirming the March decision for the academic track. All in favor of calling the question, moving to a vote, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Motion is to reaffirm the academic field of study as passed in the March meeting. It consists of U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, and 2 of the following courses: Texas History, Western Civ 1 and 2, World Civ 1 and 2, Mexican American History 1 and 2, or African American History. All in favor of the 12-hour academic field of study signify by saying aye. Aye.
Raise a hand.
Raise your hands.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's unanimous.
It's unanimous.
Yeah.
Unanimous. Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. Good. Okay. That was a controversial. That was a controversial one. Well, it just, I think we needed to have that conversation, but it's the only other item of business that I see that sits before us at this moment. There are 2 more items of business. What we have to do now is the public comments. Public comments are, as Rex Peebles noted when he came here, they came to talk to us, are an essential part of this process. Lisa and I have read these comments over and over and over again. We've thought about them. We discussed all of the public comments that related to teacher cert with the teacher certification subcommittee, and we came to agreement on those things. Those public comments informed the creation of the teacher certification track B. What we need to do today is address public comments that were meant directly for this body, the academic track subcommittee.
Alan, I'd like to thank you for resending those because they're indeed very, very deep in the email box.
All right, thanks. While I have the microphone, let me throw in a wrench to something that you've already just voted on. In terms of parity, there's no consensus here that in the teaching track, you're requiring World Civilizations 1 and 2. In the academic track, you're giving them the choice of Western Civ or World Civ. Is there any sentiment for giving them the option of taking World or Western in the teaching track? We want to ensure that they take World. Yeah, okay, that was the consensus in the public comments, and I just wanted to be clear for the record that we're not giving the option of Western Civ for the teachers. Right. I'm sorry, back to regular programming.
No, thank you so much. So the comments that we need to address are, the first comment can be found on page 3. The comment is create an ACGM course in historical methods and add it to the academic track. We just reaffirmed the academic track that we did in March. So the easiest way, I think, to do these public comments is if, and I think the most honest, forthright way to do them, is if I put them in the form of a motion, and we discuss each motion and we vote on each motion. Yes?
But we already voted on these in the document that Alan sent. Like, we had responded to it and said yes or in favor or opposed. Yeah.
Yes, what I did was a tally here, and the assumption was that if a majority approved a change, then that was what we brought back to the committee to discuss. And the only thing that in the tally came clear was that we did not have the expertise to determine the teaching track, so you all voted to have the subcommittee, which we did. All of the others, I think we rejected in the tally. Now, that was in an unofficial tally here. If you wish to discuss it again here as a formally called public meeting and air these issues out and revisit any of these issues, you're absolutely free to do so.
Or we can just go with the tally we already did? Is that what you're saying?
That's my phone ringing, or my watch is buzzing me, or I'm getting a phone call. I'm sorry. Go away, stop.
I think my concern is that if we don't have the full committee here and we have, it looks like just by looking at the numbers, a more representative sampling of the committee on this particular vote in the document that's already, do we really want to take it up again?
I would be in favor of going with the previous electronic tally voting.
I think that's fine. I think, yeah.
Well,
That's a motion, I'll second it.
I move.
Well, it's worth thinking about it, because as if you want to take a moment to just scan through them to see if there's any that you want to bring back up to the table in light of the subcommittee's meeting and in light of your discussion today. I mean, sometimes when the context changes, your opinions about some of these questions might change, and all these public comments have been given. They're as full and airing as possible. So don't just dismiss it out of hand. If you want to flip through and take a look at the public comments and see if anything really jumps out at you that needs to be rethought through on the basis of today's meeting, then we certainly have time to do that.
Rather than make a motion, what I would suggest is let me read them. Let me read the ones that are particularly applicable to this body. I'll read just the very few, and then if you hear any that you want to talk about, stop me, and we'll talk about it. So the first is create an ACGM course in historical methods and add it to the academic track. Any desire to revisit that?
What was the?
That tally was
5, 4, and 8, no. And I was one of the 5, 4, only because going on my limited experience, but over at A&M, they have a historical methods class, history, I forget, 280, 281, and so. Well, that's new, though. Actually, that happened in the 7 years I was there. They only had a senior seminar in U.S. history where students learn writing, but then they decided, we need students to take writing at the sophomore level. So that was my reason, because I think before they get to you all at the universities, they should have taken like a methods writing course. So that was why I voted yes.
The biggest issue.
The transferability.
Were saying, wait a minute,
Yeah,
we're taking
that's
3
too many
out.
more. Yeah. So, but
That's the biggest issue. I
yeah.
understand.
I just wanted to represent that view. I'm not
I
like,
agree with you, but
yeah.
There are two different things here. One is creating an ACGM course, And the second is adding it to the academic track. And it seems to me that those are two very different things, and one probably should be done before the other. It doesn't have to be, but
There
probably
might
should
already
be.
be a course, sorry, just the academic cooperative, I forget the course.
Yeah,
number.
yeah,
It
you
might
can use
already
it for that.
use it. So you wouldn't have to.
Yeah, part
necessarily
of
create it.
part of the issue that I foresee, I don't know if it's the same way at other community colleges, but at my community colleges, all history courses are capped at 40. I mean, I do write 4 papers a semester, so it is essentially a writing intensive, but if we're saying like this should be uber writing intensive, I wouldn't want a 40-person class in which they're all writing like big 10, 12-page historical research projects, because that would be just sheer lunacy to grade.
We're moving to have historical methods at the undergraduate level at Texas Tech, and we think it's very important. That said, even at the graduate level, I don't really trust my colleagues to produce people who've learned historical methods. That's all.
Fair point.
Make sure that's on the record. All of those colleagues watching on YouTube. So,
I mean, it's 8-5, 8 no, so.
perfect. What I think is I'll read these and I will pause and wait for any motion. If you wish to address this in a motion, make a motion. Hearing none, we move on to the next, which is located on page 8. In the academic FOS, permit Texas history and Mexican American history be taken in lieu of U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2 in keeping with the statute permitting this substitution within the core. Just a very brief point of information, the core and the field of study are two different things. We've talked about that earlier. There were 3 people who voted yes. There were 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 who voted no. Any desire to discuss this or motions made about this? Hearing none. The next is on page 11. Reduce the academic field of study from 12 semester credit hours to 9, consisting of 6 semester credit hours of U.S. history and 3 semester credit hours of non-U.S. history. Here it was 4 yes and 8 no. One of the points, just a point of information about this, one of the things that I like about what we did in March is these courses will not have a direct, provided good advising, will not have a direct impact on many 4-year degree programs because they are interchangeable with the core in a variety of different ways. So my students can take U.S. History 1 and U.S. History 2, which are transferable to the core, and they can also take World History, which is transferable in other areas of the core. Any desire to talk about that? Motion's made. The next is on page 12, require 3 semester credit hours of pre-1800 history. This had 2, 4, and I assume 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 11. 11 opposed. Desire to address that, revisit, motion's made.
But isn't it in place by the 1301s?
Well, to a certain extent, and the World Civ 1 to a certain extent, and your co-chair who believes that everything after 1750 is a current event agrees with you. So.
That's what I was going to ask, yeah.
So that would have effectively met most of the students who have done work.
Any other discussion? Our next item is on page 16. If I'm going too fast, stop me, because it's very important to me that we give time to these items. Make the academic track the same as the teacher certification track. You do it. Here, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, and 8 against. Any desire to revisit this? Motion's made. Hearing none, the next is on page 17. require at least one non-U.S. history course in the academic track. Three, four, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 against. Any desire to revisit this or discuss it, or motions made? The next is on the next page, page 18. Limit the history field of study to one track, including history 1301, 1302, and the world civilization courses. Unanimously rejected, but we have to, I think we should bring it up. I will pull out the remaining bits of my hair if we, after we've done all this work. Any desire to discuss this or chat about this? Okay. The final one here that we should, just transparency, so we've discussed everything. Require world civilization in both the academic and teacher certification tracks. We require it in teacher cert now, where it's an option in the academic track. Here, this was a little closer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 against. Any desire to review that or think about that? Please, absolutely.
So the reason I had voted for this was that I know at some institutions, like, so for example, I got my bachelor's at A&M, Texas A&M. And it's entirely possible, because at least when I was there, I don't know if it's changed. At least when I was there, it was just you take this many classes at this level, this many at this level. They don't specify regional or temporal. So for some students, that either Western Civ or World Civ is the only opportunity they would potentially get to do a non-U.S. course, because they could just take nothing but U.S. history. That was my concern as an instructor, is like, I know that I went through, and that was Western Civ was the only non-U.S. course I ended up taking as an undergrad. So I would have liked to have been made to be exposed to other fields earlier than graduate school. Forced to be exposed.
I would say that that's a bad curriculum, if that is allowed, but I don't know if this body is the place to legislate against it.
I just wanted to ask, is there a reason we didn't do?
Those are teacher cert. And
Oh,
we
okay,
addressed
we're
all
doing,
those in our
okay,
teacher
got
cert.
you.
So I was just
Oh,
doing
okay,
the
good.
ones that
I
were-
just wanted to clarify. I'm like, wait, why are we skipping some? Now I understand.
So just to be clear for all of us and for anyone out there in posterity to know that this, that the co-chairs have addressed all public comments. Those that dealt with teacher cert, with the teacher certification committee, we went through each one individually and had votes on. We had votes on each one individually that dealt with the academic track with this body, both online, and we revisited them again today. So we have been very conscious, very, very aware of those comments, and have attempted to address them in all ways that we could. I think at this moment, the only other order of business, to clarify, just to clarify, because we have made some changes, and I want to make sure for our minutes that we are correct. The academic field of study that was proposed at the March meeting and reaffirmed today includes U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, and then 2 of the following courses. I won't go through them, but they're all the ACGM courses. We talked about those. They appear on the bottom of your, there are 8 courses, and they appear on the bottom of your sheet. The teacher cert track includes U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, World Civ 1, World Civ 2, and Texas History. So that is a 15-hour course, a 15-hour field of study. The academic field of study is 12 hours. Those are the major decisions that we've made today. Before we do our final bit of business, is there any business that the committee wants to bring before us? Are there any other points of discussion, debate, issues we need to solve?
I would just encourage you all to remember that part of your job on the committee is to act as a kind of ambassador from the committee to the institutions. You don't have to support necessarily the field of study, but I would appreciate it if you could help to clarify the issues for your faculty members and deans and department chairs who may have questions about how the field of study works, what the requirements of using the field of study are for transfer, and hopefully to try to explain the process that we go through to come up with the field of study. I would also encourage you to speak with your colleagues at your institution and in your system and in your community college district to please note carefully when this comes out for 30-day public comments so that we can get as wide as possible buy-in from institutions about the public comments, because we want, I mean, the concern, the perfectly justifiable concern that we've heard expressed from many institutions is there aren't enough faculty creating these fields of study to make it, possible for accreditation to say that faculty are creating these fields of study. You heard Mr. Peoples say today that a committee of 87 people really isn't feasible, so we're doing the best we can with the maximum size of a committee that statute lets us have, which is 24, and to pull together people from all across the state. But the public comments here are so important. I mean, sometimes the public comments seem like kind of an afterthought after the work like a committee does this, the kind of work this committee does, but they're really key. I mean, it's a very important part of the whole process because that is when the other 80 members of the committee all across the state have their chance to weigh in on this. And as you can see from what we just did, all of the public comments are aired out in a public forum for full discussion and given careful consideration. So please encourage your colleagues to send them in. When they do, when we get public comments, it's helpful if we hear from departments instead of individuals, because if we hear 6 faculty members all from the same department, that's okay. We'll give them all the same equal weight, but you're going to get a lot of repetition that way, and one institution is getting kind of a lion's share of the attention relative to other institutions. So it's a little more efficient if you could encourage departments to bring this up at a faculty meeting as an item for discussion, and then come to a sense of the department's reaction to the field of study, and then maybe the chair or the assistant dean or somebody can write a letter from the institution saying history here at UT Arlington feels that X. So that kind of thing is helpful. Also, when you respond to the public comments, just a little editorial comment here, you're on your own for how you respond, of course, but don't forget the good discussion that we had here and the debates that we've already had here. The committee's response to the public comment needs to be, as much as possible, the committee's response to the public comment, not necessarily each individual's response coming up all over again, reinventing the wheel on the issue. So I would encourage you to remember the discussion we had today when the public comments come up, as they inevitably will, about Mexican-American history, about Texas history, about Western civilization. And maybe when we respond to that, we can respond as a committee with fewer of these really close 7-6 votes on the tally. Because if we get a lot of those 7-6 kind of votes and splits on the tally, the administrators here at the coordinating board are going to want you to come back and discuss this again in person, because we really want there to be a sense that we are getting this right. And if the committee can't agree on something, then that really doesn't look good, and it's not best case for departments across the state. Now, that being said, what I am not saying, please be clear, is that if somebody makes a really excellent point in the public comments and makes a strong case and sends us a persuasive letter like this with co-signatories and lots of evidence and good reasons, and somebody changes your mind, then say so, please. And say so when we vote on these public comments. And if there is good reason for the committee to have split decisions on things, then this committee needs to come back, and you should want it to come back if the public comments genuinely change your mind about something. So please just be honest in your assessment of the public comments, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm with Jacob. It seems like we're on meeting 2 here, and it would. Hopefully we can come to some sort of wrap this up and get this on the way to getting approved. Speaking of which, about getting approved, before we leave, I would like someone to make a motion to authorize the co-chairs to take care of some committee business so that we don't have to reconvene to take care of small issues to comply with Open Meetings Act laws, such as approving the minutes after I send them, of course, to you for your edits, approving the final minutes, making non-substantive edits to documents, and conducting assorted business as it comes up related to getting the field of study either approved through the board approval process or the decision involved and the organization involved with bringing the committee back again for a third meeting. But before we do that, I'm sorry I cut you off, Ben.
Just want to make one request. It's already been kind of said, but I want to reiterate it, that in the interest of kind of the transparency and then us going back and representing our work to our institutions, I would again like to request that all the correspondence with SACS be shared. I know it was addressed not to, to an individual person, but if there's anything we can do to make sure that that is received, because in the absence of knowing the details of those conversations, I can say that paranoia is probably distorting reality.
The letter to SACS is a public document. I'm not I can see if I can distribute that to you. We have already sent our response, the commissioner's response to SACS, to all your presidents and CAOs and liaisons. So that's free to distribute.
The department level and also the material from SACS. I think that's
SACS,
probably
it just came in on Friday, and as Rex said, since it was addressed to the commissioner, I want to get the commissioner's go-ahead as a formality to make sure that we can distribute that, although that was a letter from SACS, so it's really SACS's decision to release it publicly. So perhaps the commissioner's office will want to get in touch with the SACS office to confirm that could be distributed. I don't anticipate a problem with that. But I will definitely make sure that you all get it. And whether or not it goes out to all CAOs and all that, I imagine it will, but I can't say for sure. It's not my call. But I will certainly get that to you. Basically, I saw it this morning. It's like half of one page. It's pretty short. It acknowledges that they received our letter. The second paragraph says, like in a sentence, that they do not see any conflict between SACS accreditation standards and Texas policy on developing the field of study, and that's in relation to faculty representation on creating the curricula. And then a conclusion that said something like, if any other issues arise, please stay in touch, kind of conclusion. That's my memory of it, the substance of it. But I'll make sure that you all get a copy as soon as I get the go-ahead. But thank you.
We're waiting on a motion to approve.
Yeah, we need a motion to authorize the co-chairs.
I make a motion to authorize the co-chairs to take care of the minutes and the making the public aware that we did everything the way that we were supposed to.
All in favor of the motion on the table, signify by saying, well, raise your hands. Raise your hand so that everybody out in TV land can see us. Thank you. Okay, unanimous decision. Thank you. The final thing I'd like to do is just a moment of personal privilege. I'd like to thank my co-chair for, under the assumption that this might be our last meeting, I want to thank Lisa very much for her hard work on the committee.
Thank you too. You've been a great support, and I want to say even like a mentor, because this is new for me. I haven't done extensive advising. I've been learning as I go, and so thank you for respecting me.
Of course, always, always. And I think we both want to thank Alan for his work on the committee. I really appreciate Alan for his quick responses to emails and his steady hand in our deliberations. And of course, finally, I want to thank every member of this committee, both with us and not with us today, for their dedication to the important work that we've done, not only in March, not only in November, but also today. And that being said, Blosser makes the motion. Blosser moves for, not adjournment yet.
Let me nag you to fill out, if you haven't already done so or want to revise it now, that estimate of your cost and time for meetings. Clearly, it needs to be redone because you've traveled again and spent more time on this. So I'll send that back out to you. It's a good reminder. Make a note to do that. Because we need to give the state an assessment of what these committees are costing the state in terms of time and blood and money. So I'll send that back out to you. And there's no great hurry on it, but don't forget about it and send it back to me.
You're going to send that out to us in an email?
I will send that to you in an email. Yeah, you can forget if you've already sent it in before. You can just forget it and do it all over again, or I'll add it to what you sent in before, so that you can give me an estimate of what the totality of what you've spent on the field of study. It doesn't have to be an exact figure; just a rough ballpark will give me an idea.
And may the minutes show that the motion to adjourn was given 26 minutes before we're supposed to be out of here. So you did some good work. Is there a motion to adjourn? So
motion to
moved
adjourn.
and seconded. All in favor signify by leaving. Thanks very much. Well done.
Alan, I have the form from November.